evening, everyone. We're on the regular business meeting of the District of Squamish for January 17th, and we're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. In front of council is an amended agenda. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none. We don't have any delegations, petitions, or proclamations. Consideration of unscheduled public attendance. So if there's an item on the agenda that you'd like to speak to and it's of a timely manner, please just put up your hand and council could consider entertaining your comments.
No, I haven't.
See anybody's hand?
Anywhere.
Yeah. Please come up. Sorry, you have to come up to the podium and just state the issue and the reason why it's a timely manner.
Oh, yeah, it did.
Peter Winter with the Climate Action Society of BC. I sent an email on behalf of the society a couple hours ago, 3 hours ago.
You got it.
So I'd like to speak further to that. However, we'll just echo what was written in the email. All the email members have read that email and understood our concerns. I would be happy with that. If you need further explanation or opinions from us, I'd be happy with that.
In your letter outlined, I think, 2 issues. One was with regard to the terms of reference to the Smoke Bluffs Committee, correct?
That's correct.
And one was about the proposed development, Kristall Turm in the portion of the parking lot at the Adventure Center.
Yes.
I think all of council has it in front of them. So, and I believe I certainly have read it. I believe council's read it. So,
Okay.
so that you okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? For unscheduled public attendance? Yeah, come on up, state your name and the item that you'd like to speak to, and the timeliness of it.
I'm Chris Small, I'm president of the Squamish Adventure Society, and we also sent a submission regarding both of the same issues that Peter was just talking about. And we've outlined our position in that letter as well, and we're hoping that you read it and consider it. Thank you.
I want to just make sure, did we get Mr. Small's letter?
I did not receive a letter from Mr. Small.
Not from Mr. Small,
It was
it's from...
Oh, from the climate
Yes, from
council.
the- yes.
Oh, yeah, we from your legal counsel.
Yeah,
Well, I-
Gerhard, so...
Oh,
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it.
we did get that letter as well.
I haven't
Yeah.
seen it. You see
Yeah,
it?
it's in front of council, so, yeah. We got a lot of correspondence on, well, not so much on the makeup and smoke bus committee, but certainly on the Kristall Turm, we got a lot of correspondence. Okay, anyone else for unscheduled public attendance? Seeing none? Apologies, I'm starting to get a cold happening. There are no public hearings, and first up we have 7A1, District of Squamish Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw number 2012-2007, Amendment Bylaw 2510-2016. Mr. Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Gary Buxton, General Manager here at the District. Bylaw 2510 is an amendment to the fees and charges bylaw in the planning and building permit fee schedule. We're looking to extend the exemption provided for building permit fees for accessory suites, which Council did last year, so we're looking to extend that, as well as one housekeeping amendment to language in the planning fee schedule. So last year, Council did pass an amendment to the fees and charges bylaw, which essentially from January 20th of last year to January 31st of this year exempted building permit fees for construction and alteration of secondary suites or accessory residential dwellings as a means of incentivising their construction. Parallel to that, we've also eliminated DCC charges for those sorts of structures, but that's an enduring exemption. We don't need to deal with that. We are just dealing with the building permit fees. And then in Schedule 13 there is makes multiple references to the term building areas, but we don't have a lack. We have a lack, or there's a missing definition for that, so we're going to correct that as well. So Bylaw 2510 simply replaces that exemption that was previously.
I did read it.
It extends it to January 31st, 2019. It does nothing other than change the date from 2016 to 2019. So it's essentially providing a further two-year exemption. Sorry, my math is there. In terms of the effect that we've seen for suites and accessory structures, sort of February to December 21st, 2015, 47, the similar numbers in 2016 up to 73. So it seems to have had an impact. How you can isolate the effect of this from the exemption to the DCC charges and the increase generally to construction across the community, it's difficult to tell, but it's likely had a positive impact. It certainly hasn't had a negative impact. So we're recommending that we simply continue with that for a further 2 years. With respect to the building area, we simply replace it with the term gross floor area, which is a term that's clearly defined in the zoning bylaw. So, one extension for 2 years to a policy change that the council has already made, and one housekeeping change to the terminology in that schedule of bylaw. That's really it for this bylaw. If the council has questions.
Thank you. Questions for staff on this extension and word correction? Don't see anyone. I think it's really positive to see whether it was this or a combination of things, of policies that we to augment these numbers. It's, I think, really encouraging to see, and hopefully it'll keep going in that direction. Councillor Riss?
I'll move it.
Can move it. Is there a seconder? Councillor Elliott seconds. Question? Want to speak to it?
Well, very briefly, I think Mr. Buxton highlighted it. It's probably impossible to figure out exactly what it is that's caused this increase. It's certainly a good trend, and it's kind of thing where it isn't broke, don't fix it, something like that. So I don't want to change a good thing. So,
Councillor Blackenmore.
Yeah, I'm pleased to see that we've tracked the results on this, and I'm noting that yeah, we had a 55% increase in the number of secondary suites constructed last year. So that actually exceeds the number of just regular single-family homes. So I think that's going to be very helpful for the increasing the supply of affordable housing in the community.
And just to build on that, one of the things in our discussions with the housing minister on this was, this is one of the things that municipalities can do to immediately have an effect on, filling a gap within the affordable housing spectrum. So it's good to see it actually sort of coming to fruition. Thanks. I'll call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Next up, District of Squamish Smokeless Park Committee Establishment Bylaw 1935-2006, Amendment Bylaw 2520-2017. And just to bring to Council's attention, I think there were 3 letters that reference this particular bylaw, just so we make sure Council got those in front of them. Ms. Arthur?
Thank you, Mayor Heintzman. I'm Robin Arthurs, General Manager of Corporate Services, Recreation and Culture at the District of Squamish. Tonight, bringing forward an amendment to the Smoke Bluffs Park Committee Establishment Bylaw, which includes some administrative updates to the bylaw, such as changing the name of the House Sound Trials Writers Association to 99 Trials Association, and also an amendment to the time for quorum to change it from 15 minutes to 30, so that it aligns with the rest of the council's select committees. Also included in the bylaw amendment is some language around the chair and deputy chair for the selection of the committee chair, being limited to members at large.
Thanks. So the first amendment is I'm totally fine with. The second amendment, I think we fix the
Okay, we can focus on questions first,
yeah.
and then we'll get into comments. Just if there's clarification.
Yeah, I have
questions.
no clarifications. I just have one to
Any questions for staff?
no question.
I know there's been, in some of the letters, there's been some questions about restricting the chair's position to members at large. I'm wondering if staff can articulate sort of why we consider this in changing this aspect of it, and perhaps are there other options for council to consider?
Certainly, Mayor Heinsohn. Right now, anybody on the committee can serve as chair. The chairs are selected by the committee. The thought behind this was to change it to member at large so that it would take any specific interests of any one individual group who is representing on the committee off of the ability to chair or to lead the committee. Currently, chairs can only sit for 2 terms, or 2 years, sorry. Alternatives to this might be shortening the length of time that people chair, or alternating the chair as well through the year, so that you have cross-representation and ensure that there's a more balanced approach to leadership on the committees.
Sorry, and this happens on other committees too, that there's certain representatives, it might be the chamber, it might be the Access Society, the Trial Society, they actually nominate someone, whereas members at large are debated amongst council members and then determined.
Yeah, and provide their backgrounds and their interest in serving on the committee.
Yeah, and obviously part of that is the council can deliberate on the makeup of the committee and making sure it's representative of the community.
That's right.
That's the intent of the members at large, in my understanding. Are there other options to how we sort of set the parameters of the chair and vice chair within this bylaw that council could consider as an alternative to what's in front?
Certainly, we could change the length of time that a chair sits. We could appoint the council member who is sitting as the chair. Or we could alternate between member at large and representative from a group. Maybe the chair is the member at large and the deputy chair is the representative. That provides a balance as well.
Questions?
No question.
No questions?
No.
Questions?
Would it be possible to let the Climbers Access Society just speak on their opinion, just so the public can hear as well? Mr. Benjamin, maybe?
We did give them the opportunity to do that.
I was just thinking about, we've all received the email, but the email isn't public. So I think it's
Well,
important.
it's public, it's just not, or it's public, anyone
It's not.
can come and look at it, so
Articulate.
technically it's public. It's up to council, if the Access Society wants to come, I'm certainly open to someone speaking if they would like to, beyond what's written. Council certainly read these, so we understand your concerns, but
Now that they've heard council's opinion or staff's opinion on the motion, maybe.
yeah, I'm happy to entertain that if you want to come up and speak to it. Maybe just for the record, state your name and your role within the.
Yeah, Peter Winter, the Climbers Access Society, and sorry, maybe I should have done this at the beginning, this wasn't planned.
Okay.
Just further to the letter, we were quite surprised at this inclusion in the bylaw to change the selection of chair. I mean, I sat on the Smoke Bluff Committee for years at the beginning. I know what it's all about, and typically it's been the committee itself has chosen the chair to lead it. To deliberately prevent any of the current user groups on the committee to not chair the committee. We're just a little curious as to what kind of message that is being sent to the recreation community. There are many different user groups that make up the committee, and those user groups have put their heart and soul into the park over the years. They probably put the majority of volunteer hours into the park over the years. Not to say that members at large haven't either. There's plenty of members at large that have done good work as well. But to specifically limit it to members at large, it sends a very awkward message to the recreation community. And we obviously oppose that measure. If council, has an issue with the current committee and wants to look at options, we'd be happy to work with council in that regard and come up with some other options. It sounds like there already are. So we are definitely opposed to that item in the bylaw. I don't want to speak for Squamish Act Society, but I know they feel the same way. And that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
I was going to make a motion.
Okay. Yeah,
Oh, sorry,
yeah,
go
we're
ahead.
still in questions, thank you. Councilor Lee.
So my understanding is that with the management plan almost being completed, that this committee's work will likely not be monthly. They've worked really hard to get to this point, so that it will be meeting less frequently.
If I may, in discussion with the current chair, we talked about moving the committee meetings to 3-year plus a park visit, probably in August. So, and that would be the meetings would be establishing the work program and capital budget that would be presented to council.
And actioning the master plan that's been developed.
That's right.
Questions? Yeah.
No
Councilor
questions.
Chanel? Yeah, I just want to get all the questions out there before we make statements. No more questions from council. Councilor Lease on the next on the list, then I'll go to Councilor Chanel.
Thank you. So I was going to move, I have the bylaw in front of me, and I'll move the amendment of the bylaw as set out in 2A and in 2C. And just for clarity, 2A deals with renaming Trials Association, and 2C deals with the quorum. And if it's seconded, I'll speak to that.
Seconded by Councilor
Without to be. So 2A and 2C I think are relatively straightforward. I'm not going to spend any time on those. And the reason I omitted 2B is that's the section that talks about the term, or rather the composition of the chair and deputy chair. And I have two problems with that after kind of mulling this over for a little while. One is I'm not aware of other committees where we start dictating the chairs in this fashion. The second is maybe perhaps a practical one where the majority of this committee are actually members of specific groups, and it might make it quite difficult to find people to act as chairs. And generally, my comment is that I think when we set up these committees, we should kind of, the volunteer citizen committees, let them go and run with it and make their own decisions in these things and not try and get too far into their actual workings. They make recommendations, we come back, we'll accept those recommendations or not if we don't agree with them. But beyond that, I don't like to kind of get too involved in the actual workings of the committee. In this case, I framed the motion this way because I think it's open to council, either tonight or at some later date, to suggest something else to replace paragraph B, which is the paragraph that deals with who could be the chair or not. And perhaps my suggestion would be that we defer that as a council, and I'm not making that motion, but we defer that as a council and possibly consider suggestions that the committee themselves might have if we're going to make any changes at all to that. But I don't think we have to deal with it tonight. We'll deal with the two other sections.
I just wanted to clarify, C included the quorum and the going to 30 minutes for.
Yeah, the
because
entirety
it was
is-
on the second page. Councilor Chappelle?
Thank you. I'm going to support this for the reasons that Mr. Winter put forward as well. I think this group has done an exemplary job of really coming forward. I mean, minus the one-word issue, the Smoke Bluffs management plan is an absolutely brilliant piece of work. The planning committee has done a really great job of putting that together, and the other volunteers on that committee. So I'm supporting this motion with the removal of section 10. And I think that's a really wise decision, and let the group, I really agree with letting the group decide on who the chair is.
Anyone else want to speak to this? I'll speak briefly. I don't think anyone's calling into question the dedication and the work that's been done, particularly the planning committee. Really, this is, I don't know of any other municipality that has a park that's inspiration and impetus is climbing. So it's really unique in the world. And I don't think any of us want to lose that. Happy to support the 2 minor amendments. I do think we need to figure out a way to, many of other committees, we stipulate in the terms of reference that the council members, the chair, for example. I just want to make sure that we're providing the basis, the framework within this committee to be as functional as possible. So happy to not address that particular issue, but perhaps this is something the committee wants to deliberate on, and we can readdress it in the future. Councillor Elliott.
I support the motion that Councillor Race has put forward, but I do think the piece about the chair should be considered. I mean, even within our own council committees, we only serve a year as chair, and I think the committee might want to consider having chair just serve as 1 year. And it allows fresh eyes to come in and new energy. And we do that ourselves within council. And I think it works really well to move the chair around more frequently than 2 years. So, I mean, I support the motion that's being written.
And I expect those aspects of this terms of reference will come back to council at some point, once a little more deliberations on it. Unless I see a hand, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Moving on, we have staff reports. 8A1, development permit 425 3rd Avenue. And there are variances with regard to this development permit. So as with any time we vary our rules, we allow the public to speak to the variances within the development permit. So if you would like to speak to that when it is time, please raise your name and come to the podium, state your name and all that jazz. Over to staff.
Thanks. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Terrell Gillespie, Development and Subdivision Coordinator in the Community Planning Department. For your consideration tonight is development permit number 425 for Lizzie Bay. It's a mixed-use project that, if approved, would permit the development of 29 residential units and 6,256 square feet of commercial space. It's located at 37830 3rd Avenue. The subject property is located in the downtown south neighborhood at the northeast corner of 3rd Avenue and Vancouver Street. School District 48 owns the property immediately north on 3rd Avenue, and there are several I-1, Industrial 1 zoned businesses operating all around the property, especially to the east and south. 37830 3rd Avenue is zoned Comprehensive Development Zone 43, CD 43, a zone that was adopted in 2010 specifically for this project. There are some peculiarities with the setbacks in the CD 43 zone, and I'll get to this and why it matters in a bit. The OCP designation is downtown. It's in the flood hazard area, and it's located in 2 development permit areas. Development Permit Area 3 for Downtown South, and Development Permit Area 7, multifamily residential. Just a little bit of history on this file. This property was rezoned in 2010, and a development permit was authorized by council in 2011. The old development permit expired in 2013. The old development permit and this current application are very similar, but because the old development permit expired, development permit 425 is a brand new application and has been treated as such, subject to the full review process and evaluated based on today's bylaws and policies. So back to the present, DP 425 proposes 2 3-story live-work buildings organized around a central courtyard. There are 29 residential units proposed on the upper 2 stories. The majority of the units have 3 bedrooms. Most of the residential units could be connected to the commercial space below in a live-work arrangement. There are up to 26 commercial units possible, but the intention of this plan is to provide flexibility to future owners who could decide to separate the commercial space from the residential. The small commercial spaces proposed could also be combined, a bit more on this coming up. There is an amenity room with an accessible washroom proposed on the north side of building 2, and private rooftop patios are proposed for each of the residential units. Here's the site plan in grade. It's a bit tricky to read, especially up there, so let's zoom in just a little bit and look at the commercial units first. So this is proposed building 2, just for example, which is on the northern half of the site. It has the possibility of up to 10 small commercial units, and building 1 on the southern half of the site has a possibility of up to 16 commercial units. The commercial spaces range in area from 176 to 326 square feet. And staff have a few concerns about the commercial space as proposed. Because they are small spaces, there is some concern that they could be used for residential space as an extension of the residential unit located above. Also that if the commercial space isn't connected to the residence above it, then the only washroom available for staff and customers would be in the proposed amenity room in this building. The applicant has responded to these concerns by confirming that this live work arrangement is just one possibility for the internal configuration of the building. Commercial units could also be separated from the residence above and even combined to make larger commercial spaces to which washrooms could be added. The intention is to provide a lot of flexibility to future owners who could decide what type of configuration they would like. This is just to show one way that the commercial units could be combined for a total of 10 commercial units across the 2 buildings. Okay, a little bit more about the development. So the 2 buildings are proposed to have a central courtyard between them. The courtyard is about 2,500 square feet in area. It has areas of landscaping throughout. There's benches for seating, covered canopy at the entrance, which is open to the street. The courtyard provides a gated pedestrian entrance, a gated pedestrian pathway linking 3rd Avenue to the lane, and includes basalt columns and a small water feature. The building materials proposed include hardy board, granite cladding on the ground floor, wood features, and aluminum and vinyl windows. Staff support the colors proposed as being appropriate for the downtown south neighborhood. So 3 variances are proposed to the zoning bylaw as part of development permit 425. You'll remember from the beginning of my presentation that CD 43 was created specifically for this property. So why the variances? Well, the variance requested to usable open space is because usable open space wasn't a requirement until the current zoning bylaw 2200 was adopted at the end of 2011. The variance to the number of loading spaces is considered to be minor, and the setback variance is a little bit more puzzling given that this project was originally envisioned to extend to the lot line on both street frontages. But regardless of why or how this happened, this is a new application and it's a variance request like any other. So staff consider the variance request to the usable open space required for this property to be reasonable, given the project's location downtown where higher density than elsewhere in the community is supported, and because the site is located in close proximity to downtown parks, Stan Clark Park in green. The closest trail is the Town Bike Trail, also in green, and other amenities like the library in yellow. Sorry, those colors are hard to see there. The private rooftop decks also contribute to the livability of the residences, as does the amenity room on the ground floor of Building 2. Staff consider the off-street loading variance from 2 spaces to 1 space to be minor. It's anticipated that a lot of quick loading would happen from the street anyway, closer to commercial units. The front setback, that's on Vancouver Street, is proposed to be reduced from 1.52 meters to 0.4 meters. And based on ADP comments and advisory design panel comments and in working with staff, the applicant has proposed setting the ground floor of the building back 1.4 meters along Vancouver Street. This is to allow more room for a wider sidewalk and space for street trees and furniture. The top 2 stories will overhang, which would shade the street, but does provide the benefit of weather protection. A generous awning is also proposed to further shield pedestrians from the rain. Space is limited within the off-site roadway on Vancouver Street. Vancouver Street is a truck route, and it's classified as a major collector. The new active transportation plan also calls for a bike lane along Vancouver Street. With the addition of the 1.4 meters at grade on site, which allows for wider pedestrian public realm, staff do support this variance as it provides enough space for the wide vehicle lanes needed along a truck route and a bike lane and a sidewalk area that is wide enough to be friendly for pedestrians and businesses who will have enough space for outdoor displays and sandwich boards, seating, other business-friendly features. The setback variance proposed along 3rd Avenue is a little bit more problematic. 3rd Avenue is classified as a minor collector, and according to the active transportation plan, is to have a separated bike lane. The applicant is requesting a setback variance along 3rd Avenue from 4.57 meters to 0.2 meters, again with the ground floor setback. The ground floor is proposed to be set back 1.3 meters along 3rd Avenue to provide more room for the separated bike lane and a wider sidewalk. So the district subdivision and development control bylaw is currently lacking streetscape standards for 3rd Avenue because the minor collector standard doesn't include a separated bike lane. The sidewalk is thought to be too narrow for downtown commercial areas, and in the current bylaw, on-street parking is only required on one side of the street. Engineering and planning staff have been working together as part of the upcoming zoning bylaw amendments and in advance of updating downtown streetscape standards to determine what the ideal road width would be on streets like 3rd Avenue. And staff currently recommend 25 meters as sufficient width to allow for vehicle travel lanes, on-street parking, separated bike lanes, and more generous pedestrian and business-friendly sidewalks. The road right-of-ways throughout downtown, with the exception of Cleveland Street, are 20 meters wide. So to achieve this 25-meter ideal, there would need to be a 2.5 meter setback along both sides of the street. This is less than the 4.57 meter setback along 3rd Avenue in the CD43 zone, but obviously more than the 1.3 meter at-grade setback proposed. So the differences in the possible streetscape designs between what is thought to be ideal along 3rd Avenue and what is proposed with the 1.3 meter setback are subtle, but there are trade-offs to be made, as I've tried to illustrate here. So the image on top shows half of a 25-meter road cross-section. So in this example, there would need to be a 2.5 meter setback on private property. Below is the applicant's preliminary streetscape proposal. And please note that this proposal is preliminary and for illustration purposes only. If this project moves forward, the actual street design would be determined through the servicing agreement process prior to building permit issuance. I'd just like to illustrate that what's proposed is narrower vehicle and bike lanes, reduced buffer widths, and a narrower sidewalk with overhanging upper floors. This is just one possible configuration. Another trade-off, if it ends up being more desirable to keep the wider travel lanes and buffers, would be to eliminate the on-street parking on one side of the street. Overall, staff and the advisory design panel feel that this setback variance is too big given what the zone calls for and what would be considered a better downtown streetscape, especially given the spread out nature of the proposed development. Staff would also like to note, with the exception of the setback variances, DP 425 complies with the other requirements of CD43. The proposal comes close to maximizing the floor area ratio and the height permitted in this zone, which means that should this setback variance be found to not be acceptable, the project would require major redesign and possibly consideration of rezoning. This project does meet all guidelines of the downtown south and multifamily residential development permit areas. The advisory design panel reviewed DP 425 twice, once in September and once in October of last year. After each review, the applicant made changes to the proposal in response to advisory design panel comments. Changes made include an entirely new and improved landscape plan, a more open and inviting central courtyard, replacement of stone veneer with granite cladding, and improved pedestrian connections through the courtyard and along the north side of the site. The advisory design panel felt that despite the proposed at-grade setbacks, the setback variances requested are excessive given the nature of the development. Staff do not believe that the applicant has adequately addressed this concern. I'd like to just note quickly that there is an error in the staff report, my apologies. In the table in the ADP section, I'd just like to clarify that the residential units, even when not connected to the commercial space below, can be accessed from both the parking areas behind and from the front of the building. The arrows just show where the doors are on the front of the building there. There are a lot of really good things about this proposal, like the courtyard, the improved landscaping, the possibility of live-work units, the size of the residential units. Staff have struggled with the recommendation I'm getting to because there are also challenges with this proposal. The setback variance on 3rd Avenue is the big one, especially because the project otherwise fits the CD43 zone. So increasing the setback would necessitate huge revision to the proposal. The size of the commercial units is also a potential challenge. To work as a commercial space, they would need to be truly live-work or available at rent low enough to function as an incubator type space. Concern about the small size of the units could be addressed if the units end up being combined, but then you would lose the live-work nature of the proposal, which is, I think, part of what makes it special. Overall, this is a large site in an area that is transitioning as downtown develops, and that is also kind of a transition zone itself between downtown and the more eclectic downtown south. It has the potential to be a prominent location in the future, and for this reason, staff are seeking council direction.
So just so it's not confusing, on the agenda, there is a motion to consider adopting it. But however, the staff report articulates that staff would like council to send it back to staff to work with the proponent more. Just
Yeah,
wanna
sorry, I
clarify.
should have
I
checked the...
think there is actually
the
an
agenda.
error on the recommendation. So the staff recommendation is the recommendation in the report, which says to refer it back to staff. But for some reason, the recommendation in the agenda is to authorize development permit.
So just wanted to clarify that.
This stuff must have been changed.
So I'm going to go to council for questions, and because there are variances in this development permit, as I said before, if you'd like to speak to the variances, that's part of the public process, and I do have one name on my list, but if you want to speak, just put your hand up and I'll acknowledge you and you can go up to the podium to speak. So questions for staff. Councillor Race.
Thank you. Could you go back to the screen, that one? And so when you go in where those two arrows are, where do you go then to access the residential units?
They're not easy plans to read. You would walk through and then there'd be stairs up to the residences above. Kind of like
Series of stairs going off
Along
that
there, yeah.
to the second floor of the building, which is the first floor of the residence.
Yeah, each residence is sort of a kind of a stacked thing, so commercial on the bottom and then the residence above is second floor, third floor above it, and then rooftop patio.
And just to clarify, there's a staircase for each residential unit. Like there's not one staircase. It's, here's unit 1, stairs up. Here's unit 2, stairs up, correct?
Yeah.
And in addition, there's a staircase from the commercial space into the residential?
Yeah.
Questions for clarification purposes for staff? Councillor Shaw.
Just on the CD zone, so this doesn't, it's a completely different CD, it's its very own CD zone?
It is, yes. I believed it was based on the commercial C10 artisan village zone originally.
C10 zone?
I think it was based on the C10 zone, but it
Based
is
on
its
its
own
own
thing,
CD?
CD43.
So-
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to how that fits with our OCP designation coming up. You know, I think that these projects, you know, are acting in isolation. I just wonder how that isolation.
So this isn't rezoning. I hear your question,
Yeah.
however, it's a development permit application.
Exactly.
But perhaps that's something we could answer outside of this, because it's not part of the decision-making in front of us technically. But it is part of the greater conversation about how this fits in with the OCP. But it technically complies with our current OCP. It was rezoned 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
This,
And so it's the development permit, we're not at the development permit stage, so it's form and character and variances that we're talking about.
so just on process, so if the development permit expires and they have to reapply, because they're reapplying before we have the OCP
The OCP is not changing.
It has nothing, yeah, there's no, we have no control except for the variances in front of us. And like the accessibility issues, all of those issues, are those things?
Form
that we
and
address now?
character, accessibility, sighting, built environment, that's all part of the DP. And it's outlined within VP7, I believe this is, what those parameters are. This is a development permit, not a rezoning or OCP amendment.
So those accessibility issues, like the fact that there's stairs to each unit, but it's 3 stories of stairs, which makes it relatively inaccessible. And the commercial unit, inaccessibility and lack thereof.
These are akin essentially to a townhome, where you have each unit having the whole vertical space from the floor to the top.
The residential units aren't ground floor.
Right, but there's no elevator spaces, there's no.
This is not an
there's no
apartment building,
accessibility,
there's no requirement within this to have an elevator.
Right. Thank you.
Councilor,
I'm sorry if I missed this, I'm not at my best tonight, but when the CD zone was approved, it was approved with the 4.5 meter setback on Third.
That's correct.
So this developer had that setback when they designed this.
Yes. Yeah,
There was also,
there was a DP, not issued, there was a DP authorized by council, DP 253, I believe, that proposed 0 lot line setback on 3rd Avenue and Vancouver Street.
but it
It
expired.
expired.
It expired.
Expired. This is a new, but originally always the CD zone required a 4.5 meter setback on Third so that we could do what we needed to have the proper road.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ken.
Basically ask the question I was going to ask. So, and that is our prime sticking point, really, in this development, is the variance that we're requesting on Third.
It's sort of that in combination with it being quite a spread out on the site. Although it's spread out, that's in response to the CD43 zone itself.
And in conversations you've had with the proponent, how do they answer the questions on the variance at all? They're standing by that request?
Yes, the proponent has added that ground floor setback. That's new to this application. Didn't exist in the old development permit. So the 1.3 and 1.4 meter ground floor setback is the response to that.
Is that clear for everybody? And any more questions for clarification purposes from council? Yeah, go ahead.
I just wonder, you know, like, we're putting forward all this policy on form and character, on how we want to see our community built, and yet we still have these sort of applications that don't meet any of our community needs. And we have to entertain them, except, or we can return the setbacks and give this back to staff, and hopefully the developer will work within the boundaries that our community wants instead of what's easy to get through. So I'm just hoping that if we send it back, like, the controls that we have over what makes a project good, accessible, valuable commercial development with residential on it, like we've espoused ever since the beginning of our term. And yet we still get these projects through and our control is only the variance. So our control now is to send it back to you, and hopefully the developer will see that council has plans for the community that are in the best interest of our community and projects we want to see here. Is it basically just moving it back to staff so that they can work with the developer? And then hopefully he'll concede to our community vision instead of
If council doesn't issue the DP with the variances, it would go back to the developer to work with staff to bring something back that council might accept. Questions for clarification purposes? Councilor Ray.
Thank you. Going back to this 3rd Avenue variant, so I was on council in that term. Of course, I don't remember the detail of this. I do remember the zoning, but I don't remember the DP. But the zone, let me see if I've got this correctly, the zoning provided for 4 meter setback from the property line. And that allowed the road to be widened.
I don't know the intention of that 4.57 meter setback on Third Avenue, just that it's in the zone.
Meter.
Centimeter.
But then,
Sorry, did I say centimeter? Meter.
but the development permit was issued, provided for 0 setback. So does that take the whole 4-meter piece in effect back again, or just a portion of it back? Because I'm wondering what's changed. Is the addition of the separated bike lane in the boulevard that's changed, that's throwing these measurements out? And that is the thing that has, in effect, placed the building closer to the street?
Through you, Mayor Husband, yes, the addition of the separated bike lane through the active transportation plan, as well as just increased understanding of the need for wider sidewalk spaces to provide a more friendly pedestrian.
Any more questions for clarification of this? Councillor Rathmore.
Can you remind me, what was our option for reducing the car lane width? What were we looking at?
Yeah, maybe go back to that. Yeah.
Because I mean, my perspective on it, wider streets, you know, especially drive lanes for cars, don't necessarily make for safer roads. I know that maybe the engineers would debate that with me, but I mean, I would be okay with reducing those drive lanes and keeping them as small as possible. You know, if we had to make use of that. My other question is looking at the surrounding context on that same block, but at the corner of Main Street. Is the setback there? I mean, it looks almost like a 0 lot line, 0 setback as well. Yeah, well.
Yeah, maybe that'll do. That Main.
Because like my question is like if that's already there, then I mean, how would we build a road that jog? Like I don't really understand how that. Do you know what I mean? I guess my question is are we not already constrained on this block because of the low setback of that building, which is quite new?
Right.
I can try and answer that through the chair. What we're going to get is a better pedestrian environment in front of this building. The road's essentially going to remain the same. We're essentially taking some of the streetscape and requiring that to be provided on the private property. So the drive lane, the parking lane, the bike lane will be there. It's just you'll get a better sidewalk in front of this building than you would in front of the other building.
Okay. Questions for clarification purposes from staff before I do it with the public? Let's see any. I have Mr. Farstad is the only person on my list here, but if you'd like to speak to the variances in this development permit, please put your hand up and I will acknowledge you and go to the podium. Farstad would like to speak. Please state your name and street address and if you represent yourself a business or an organization.
My name is Graham Farstad, Arlington Group Planning and Architecture, Suite 103470 Granville Street in Vancouver.
And you're representing
I'm representing the owners of the project. I was also involved in the project in 2011. There was some comment about that, maybe just by way of explanation. It may sound strange, but the development permit at the time was based on the C10 zoning, which had that 4.57 meter setback. The development permit that was approved did not even mention any setbacks. And that is because staff at the time felt that the setbacks were irrelevant. They wanted to bring the project close to the street, and so the setbacks were not even cited. The only variance that was cited at the time was a minor variance in parking. So it may sound strange. We know we're not dealing with the development permit that was approved in 2011, but we wanted to improve upon it because the concept met all of the development permit guidelines for both Downtown South and DP7, the multifamily. We're trying to also address the most current requirements as well, but we can only deal with things that are, actually documented and written. I think the key areas that we've been looking at is try to provide a focal point in an area which, if you look on the first drawing, it's not that easy to see, but there's a lot of vacants, single-family dwellings, and warehouses with 3 blank walls. So we're starting in a pretty difficult area. One of the key things we want to do is establish an activity area. And because this is such a long site, we want to break the building up so it doesn't look like a super tanker. We want to have an activity area in the middle so that the activity focuses inward to have, initially it was an artisan concept, now we're looking at more of a commercial focus with some very attractive features in that. We also want to be pedestrian friendly, cyclist friendly, and recognize that these are employment lands that we're trying to generate employment from. Just to mention the areas that we are, I think, very on side with in terms of planning. The development permit guidelines, we've met and received ADP support. A couple of things I should mention, though, because it doesn't reflect the whole story. Usable open space. In fact, we're achieving about 35% usable open space instead of the 30%. There's a dimension that Squamish requires to measure open space, which makes it virtually impossible for any development to achieve that. But from a practical point of view, we have all of the balconies on the top floor are very usable open space. If we took out the medians between them, they'd all comply. But of course, everyone is going to want to have some element of privacy, so it doesn't show quite that way. If you could perhaps advance that, Trail, just about 4 or 5 slides to show the rooftop. It is very usable space, and as was noted, the building is only 3 stories, so we have wanted to make use out of the top story because you had it.
Sorry, it's doing the Acrobat registration thing.
Each one of the units does have, as I say, very usable space, and it's a landscaped area on the roof. So this is private usable space in those areas. That's on the right-hand side, landscaped as well as flat areas. And we also have usable space at the ground level, which was identified. And we also have indoor usable space as well. That is accessible, handicapped accessible, as is all of the commercial space. So we're fully meeting all bylaw requirements and building code requirements. There are a couple of features that were mentioned, and I think they're important to note. We've identified 4 areas for indoor cycling storage. I think that probably exceeds virtually any other project you would see, as well as outdoor areas along the boulevard. And that's combined with the area of the roadway cross sections, which, as we went through the process, after we'd finished going through the design panel, we received a call from planning saying, Council's considering new changes in terms of cycling to provide for both Vancouver and 3rd Avenue. And with 3rd Avenue, we're looking at a separated bicycle lane. And as was noted, the 25-meter and 22-meter cross sections were identified, and of course there's only 20 meters in either case. So that was a really huge challenge. And to address that, we actually changed landscape architects to get somebody that could really address this amazing challenge. And I think we've done that. With respect to Vancouver Street, we actually widened the pedestrian sidewalk because I didn't feel that the request was for a wide enough sidewalk. So we've increased that to 2.1 meters, as is the same on 3rd Avenue. And we widened the landscape area on Vancouver Street as well, because we pulled in the building more, so we actually have more space than a 22-meter cross-section would call for, because we're for a half road. The other aspect on 3rd Avenue is that we are meeting all of the requirements. We squeezed a couple because you can't physically put 25 meters in 20 meters and do it all without some areas being squeezed, and there wasn't a request for dedication. So what we did was look at some areas where we could pull the building inside as much as possible and make a number of other adjustments. And those were all done in conjunction with discussions with Laura Princik, and I think we've met all of those from an engineering perspective and also a landscape perspective. And there was a comment, and I should mention that, is the question of loss and trade-offs. In fact, all of the changes we did on the streets were ones that were specifically requested by engineering. There were bump outs to add to the landscaping and the variety, and also turning movements. We retained Bunt and Associates to ensure that there were turning movements from Vancouver to 3rd so that tandem trailers could move between the two streets. So, you know, that causes some loss of parking, but that's part of the trade-off. So I do think that it's unfair to talk about some of the losses when these were specifically requested of us. The final point, I guess, is the question of procedure. We have followed all of the requirements and requests, and I must say that Terrell has been very, your response has been very appropriate in bringing these challenges forward. We have made many adjustments to the project to accommodate what is being requested. We have met all of the DP requirements. We've met all of the only variance is the one which was initially not even identified as a concern of any kind. In fact, we pulled the building significantly back to accommodate that. And when we went out and talked to people, we found a very strong support from businesses in the area. In fact, we had nobody that said they didn't like the project. We got a number of letters of support from people that said this is a great project and they would love to see it happen. The areas where people noted any concern was things that we've already addressed. Noise issues were not a concern. The scale of the project, people did not want to see it. Some people did not want to see it more than 3 stories. So I think we've got a very good trade-off that reflects what the district has been looking for. The issue that I think I have to object to is the one of procedural fairness, because we have met the requirements. We have strong support from businesses. This is not a project that's not going to be an asset. What I can't agree with is the reference that the project is not in alignment with a forthcoming commercial development policy for downtown Squamish, which is not something I've ever even seen. We can only respond to what is put forward as the actual requirements, and it would be unfair to expect us to look at something that doesn't even exist, certainly as any adopted policy. So we've been working very hard since last June to accommodate this process, and I think we have a first-class project. It was something that we think that, and we're convinced is an excellent project. And after we've made all of the changes, we received an email saying that staff will be very likely to support the project despite our reservations about the setback variance proposed. This was in late November. So we had every expectation that once we had met the final details that were requested and submitted those, that we would see a positive recommendation. It came as a complete shock that this didn't occur in January. So my appeal to you has got to be in terms of procedural fairness. We've met all the requirements, and it's like the the goalposts being changed when you're on the 1 yard line. That's not fair.
Thank you very much. I'll go out to the public at this point, and once we go through the public process, we'll make sure staff has an opportunity to respond to or clarify some things, and council does too, but I'll just go out to the public to see if anyone wants to speak to the variances of this development permit. I'll ask a second time, is there anyone who'd like to speak to the variances of this development permit? And I'll ask a third time, would anyone like to speak to the variances of this development permit? Being no speakers, perhaps staff can respond to some of the things that Mr. Farsad said, and council has any questions, just let me know.
Maybe I'll just speak to the setback issue. So the setback issue is not just an issue that staff identified. This was also flagged by the advisory design panel. And the result was that the actual commercial space shrunk. So we've got less commercial space. I believe we've got a little bit of a pullback on the upper floors of the building. But the applicant was very clear that they were not prepared to pulling the building further back. And that was really the tipping point.
For the variance on the 3rd Avenue.
That's right. So we haven't had in-depth conversations with the applicant on how we could make this development improve on the development. And that's why the recommendation is to refer it back to staff so we can have those conversations.
Questions for clarification purposes for staff from council? Councilor Reese, Councilor Scott.
Thank you. Could you go to the overhead that shows the commercial spaces, please?
Is this a good one here, or?
No, there's another one.
Okay.
It had all the little blank spaces on it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I tried to make it show up a little bit better.
Probably hidden in there somewhere.
Sorry, I just gotta.
That's the one. So when you say pull the building back to create more sidewalk space, are we talking about moving the structure or just moving the front walls and the side walls to make the commercial spaces a little less deep?
Through your Mayor Heinzman, that's what was done to create the ground floor setback. Basically, the front of the commercial units was just reduced.
I think that other diagram where you show this sidescape shows it cut out. Setback. Yeah.
Yeah.
We just go to that one quickly.
There's one.
Right. So to meet the setbacks that staff are recommending or wish to see, you would pull that front wall in a little bit more? Is that the way it would be met?
Even more than, I mean, this was pushed in already to meet these parameters.
Yeah.
We're talking about moving the wall.
We believe that this, in order for this to work, it needs to be redesigned altogether. Because pulling the building further back and maintaining the back of the building in the same location just means that we're just going to keep losing the commercial space.
And there's no room for the building, take the whole building and move it back a couple of feet on the site because you're encroaching on the lane then.
Thanks. That is exactly what I was going to ask is how much, can you go back to the other commercial space? Sorry. So when I look at this commercial space, I'm trying to imagine how much, I mean, it's not really employment land at all. It's an entrance to, this is residential space. This is the entrance to a residential unit. So, because there's going to have to be, there's stairs inside as an entrance. You go into commercial space and then you go up to your condo. Is that how it's laid out? Like, it says mixed use, but it doesn't look like you can actually, or do you go behind, walk through, so there's doors on either side? I'm having trouble visualizing where you work.
So, through your Mayor Heinzman, that's one possible configuration.
Even if you open up, it's still short, it's still doors on either side, there's no actual space to work, so I'm not, and the proponent did email me, and I did explain to him, so to say they didn't understand that we've been looking at 2 floors of commercial space in the downtown is inaccurate. find that not really, I find that inaccurate to say that they didn't know that we were looking for more employment space. I would agree that this needs an entire redesign. We need at least commercial on the ground floor in this zone. This zone requires commercial on the ground floor, not residential entrances. And to me, when I look at this, it's hard to imagine that there's any workspace that's viable for a business to open in these spaces.
I think
So
that,
just, wait,
that
Mr. Parsad,
drawing there shows it
Mr.
more
Parsad,
accurately. Sorry.
I'll acknowledge you and I'm happy to have you speak, but just for clarification of Councillor Chappelle's question to staff,
How much?
the ground floor is technically zoned for commercial. It's not residential. If you use it as residential space, you're in contravention of the bylaw. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But it's,
I just wanted to clarify.
I know, but I'm not sure how
Now,
to
the report-
differentiate if it's an entrance to residential unit. If the actual commercial space is the entrance to your residential unit.
I believe there's two entrances to the commercial space, one on the street and one that is attached to the residential units above, correct? So there is commercial entrances as well as entrances from
But it's
the
the same,
unit.
it's a front and back door,
In theory, yes.
right? So it is the spaces and then the stairs are on the inside of the commercial space to go up to your. So it's, what's going to happen is people are going to park their bikes in the commercial space and go up to their thing. It's not going to be used as commercial space. And we will have no controls of that. My fear is that, it does seem like it's in contravention of the bylaws because it doesn't address commercial space. The bylaws say that ground floor needs to be viable commercial space, not stairs to a residential. If it's a stairs to the inside of a residential unit, it is a residential unit because there's no plumbing that's extra unless you open it up, unless you actually have that full configuration. But those are not viable. Those are tiny little entrances to residential buildings, as far as I can see.
So the staff report does outline the challenge with having those internal stairwells and making sure it's commercial.
Exactly.
The staff report does outline.
Which is why I'm going to refer it back to staff.
Okay, questions, clarification purposes for your staff at this point? Anyone else? Mr. Parsad, would you like to speak again? Please come up. You have to go you. Thanks.
Okay. I just wanted to point out that green space you see there is actually 1,100 square feet. It would be proposed as a restaurant. It would be pure commercial. There's no residential component. In fact, each one of those separate colors has a separate bathroom in it. The initial comment we were responding to was that each residential unit should have a small commercial space. We never thought that was a good idea, but that was an initial requirement. The building is flexible so that it can actually accommodate much fewer commercial and much more viable commercial spaces. We can have units up to 1,300 square feet as pure commercial with no connection whatsoever to residential. If that isn't a requirement, it will be a preference. So there could be some small commercial spaces where a person could have an accountant or some street level element, but the developer actually does propose to initiate a restaurant because he sees that as the best way to achieve the courtyard viability for the project. So you can see there's a total of 10 different washrooms in those different colored areas. So we would much prefer to see smaller areas, but we only responded because there was an initial request from planning to show commercial space for each unit, and they're too small. I agree.
Anyone else want to speak to the variances in this development permit? Council, are there any more questions?
Sorry.
Questions, yep.
So to staff, so looking at that site plan, where you look at, for example, the green space, the long green space, and you see the two white squares, the stuff in the center that I can't decipher, are those stairways or are those washrooms? Those are stairways? So if you wanted to disconnect that space from the residential, you would just eliminate those stairways? That's one way you could do it, I guess.
You need to get upstairs.
You'd have
But
to
there's
lock the
another
door.
entrance.
What's that?
You'd have to lock the door.
Yeah, exactly.
What door?
You still need a stairwell to get upstairs, but you could block off the entrance into the downstairs unit.
Commercial space.
You still need the stair to get upstairs.
Well, no, because is that the stairway to the, that's the stairway we talked about from entering off the corridor? Oh, I'm sorry, okay, I see now. Got it.
I mean, the stairwells have to stay there. It's the accessibility to the ground floor commercial unit and the stairwell
Right, okay.
that I think is that question, not connecting the residential piece to the commercial.
Mhm.
Otherwise, there's a susceptibility for it to all become residential.
Yes.
And the intent is to have work, live, or commercially viable spaces.
These are the kinds of details that we still have to work out on this application, because if this is the plan that goes forward, we'd have to make sure that, these units don't get stratified into single units, because that makes it much harder to, you have to have all the owners agree to assemble that commercial space downstairs. Yeah.
Did you want to speak to this? Yeah, please come on up and state your name and street address and whether it's yourself, a business, or an organization.
Mario Gomez, 38030 7th Avenue. Just to try to help out, I have no affiliation, don't even know the developer, but your concern, I think it's right, Susan, how the city can have some kind of control that it stays commercial. One thing that hasn't been mentioned here that I think, unless it has changed, this on the ground level would be under FCL, under the flood covenant, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
So this would be registered on title, and anybody that buys those units know that, legally, they cannot use that for anything that is to do with commercial. And that would give this the ability to enforce this as being, non-residential. So again, just
There's FCL, there's zoning, there's a number of pieces that the municipality can enforce to achieve the commercial. Enforce is the operative word. Okay, any more questions? I don't see anyone. Anyone from the public who would like to speak to this? I don't see any hands. Council, it is for you to deliberate. Mr. Blackenwell.
I'd like to move, I know that there was a mistake or something in the agenda, but I'd actually like to move that we not send this to staff, that we just go forward with it. So whatever that.
The one on the agenda is that the district authorized DP number 425. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I'd like to move that.
Is there a seconder? I will second it for argument's sake. Dr. Blackenwell.
Okay. So,
Can I just add that there is an alternate recommendation in the staff report that supports or recommends approving the development permit, subject to a number of conditions that staff feel are important.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, there's an alternate. Maybe I'll just let council on that. Page 22 in your report.
There we go.
Just give council a moment.
yeah, I'm fine with that. I'll move that.
Move that one?
Alternate.
Okay, so it's been moved. Want me to read it out? B, you're talking about B?
It's up on the screen.
Okay. That has been moved and seconded.
to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I actually really like this project, and I think that one of the things that we need to consider is its location within the context of downtown. Namely, it is at the edge of downtown on 3rd Avenue, and I think that that requires us to take a little bit of a different approach than if this was located more in the core area of our downtown. And I do appreciate the way that staff has been trying to navigate our desire to have, enhanced cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, and I think that that's what the implication is here. But I'm pretty confident that with the setbacks that the applicant is proposing, that we can meet those objectives. It will look a little bit different, you know, but I think that the fact that we have a bike lane, it may suggest that perhaps we have a bit more leeway on the buffer that we would have needed between the sidewalk and the roadway. So, you know, if it was right up against car traffic or whatnot, we want a good buffer. But, you know, if it's bicycle traffic, we might have a bit more leeway to work that out. And same thing with the amount of commercial. I think that, you know, this is an appropriate amount of commercial. I don't think a larger amount of commercial in this area would necessarily work in the market. So I'm not very concerned about that. And I think this is a creative mixed use, and, you know, I'd be interested in seeing this go forward. And I think that it does add a very high quality public realm that doesn't exist in this part of our downtown. So, you know, I think that we can deal with some of the things just to make it a little bit better. But, you know, traditionally in downtown areas, zero setbacks are usually the common thing. So, you know, having a 0.4 meter setback, you know, probably okay, I think, in the sense. And sometimes having less of a setback gives you a better urban realm because it's a bit more contained. And then also I like the interior courtyard plaza because that gives some weather protection, and we might have more use throughout the seasons, including our, you know, I love these covered walkways. You know, think about all the less snow removal that will have to be done for the areas. I'll leave it.
Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you. I'm not going to support this, and I don't have a problem with the setbacks. I think they're relatively small. I think they're manageable. I think in part they're caused by changes of our policy over the years, and I'm sympathetic to a point with that. What I am concerned about is the commercial and how it might evolve, and I think we should take steps right now to make sure it doesn't evolve that way to be just an entrance. I looked at this and the first thing I thought was, this is just like a basement in a townhouse, and I think we want something else, particularly if it gets stratified into the unit right above it. Its commercial viability will be very, very limited. I think this is a relatively small fix from the comments I've heard to organize the commercial space so it's more less subject to be converted to sort of the entrance to the townhouse or something of that nature. The setbacks, which I understand could be more significant than I can live with those setbacks. I think it is generally an attractive proposal. I would just like to see the commercial sorted out before it comes back to us, so we'll not support this motion on that basis.
Maybe quickly before I go to Councillor Chappelle, question to staff. If council wanted to add an amendment to this to ensure preservation of commercial on the ground floor, maybe just put your minds to if that is something we could add to this, or is it more complicated? Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you. That's interesting, but I just don't see the viability in the commercial having, you know, just looking around at the commercial that's available right now and looking at the downtown. I don't agree with Blackman Wolf, Councillor Blackman Wolf, that this is on the edge of downtown. This is downtown, 3rd Avenue, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. You know, we have a downtown core that with the densification that we're looking at is going to require employment space. And this does not address employment space. I don't mind the look of the project. I think with this, I agree that I don't think it would take that much to address actually having viable commercial spaces, and I mean 2,000 square feet plus, where we can actually have multiple people employment. And I know that, you know, without having second floor commercial space, it's really difficult right now in the downtown. Even having I don't even mind having extra density. I still consider this low density at 2 floors. This really doesn't add that much density with the ground floor commercial and the 2 floors above. I would even like to even see more density to address housing. I like the project in that it has 3-floor bedrooms, but really for people to have lived workspace, those spaces have to be viable and not interconnected with doors on either side. It's really difficult to design commercial to actually have employment in it when you have entrances in and out of either end with just 2 walls in between and staircases. That's not viable commercial space, that's bike storage. So it's, and toy storage. So I can't approve this the way it is, and the setbacks, I would agree with Councillor Race. I'm here nor there on the setbacks, but I really think this needs a serious look at a redesign with more commercial space. As far as public space, the estuary trails are right across the street from this space. On the other side, we have public parks. I would give up more of the public interior space to have more viable commercial.
So just to clarify, it's a DP, not a rezoning?
Yeah, but I think that they let their DP expire, having like come back, and that was the fail. Like basically we're having to look at the entire redesign with the DP because the other one completely failed. So we have another opportunity to address
issues within the DP guidelines.
Yeah, exactly, but our zoning in that area, C10 zoning, we've had an immense amount of public input saying that, basically saying that this area needs to be viable for live workspace and more commercial space. So I think that with that public input, that we have to be cognizant of the needs of this eclectic area.
So maybe I'll just ask Ms. Arthurs, just to clarify so we know what we're voting on. Within the DP, what is council legally allowed to comment on and to make a decision on?
And that's actually a planning question,
Okay.
not a procedural.
So the variances, there are a number of variances built in, and that's what's up for discussion.
And whether or not the council feels they've met the DP guidelines as outlined in DP 7.
Yes, the DP guidelines have been met.
You can't get into the conversation about issues that are zoning issues.
Yeah, so I'll just say that, the one that I extremely disagree with is reducing the off-street loading spaces from 2 spaces to 1. I think we have to keep loading spaces. If there's going to be commercial at all on the ground floor, it's important to have proper loading spaces.
Councillor Elliott.
I think there's a lot to like about this development. But I'm not going to support the motion that's on the floor. I take to heart the fact that twice when it was in front of the advisory design panel, they asked that the setback be addressed. And that's still my concern. Not so much, I didn't mind the variances on usable space or Vancouver Street, but 3rd Avenue, I think we need to get 3rd Avenue right. And I'd like to respect that wider setback. I do think there's issues with the commercial, but I appreciate the proponent's desire to try and do something that was flexible. There's probably still room for that if this comes forward again, but it just needs to look a bit differently. So anyway, I think, I can support a lot of the variances, but not the setback on 3rd Avenue.
Ken, did you want to weigh in?
I don't really have a problem with it. Make it succinct.
Yeah, I'll speak to it. This is a challenging one. I would like to hear from staff about the commercial aspect and how we make sure to preserve that. The setback issue, looking at it, we're still getting a bike lane, we're still getting a separated bike lane, we're still getting all those things that we would like to see on 3rd Avenue. I believe the other variances, and when we get into the CD zones, and it gets wishy-washy with variances, so I understand why some of these come back with peculiar variances. So I'm not too, I don't have concerns about the variances. I do have concerns about losing a commercial space to residential uses, in theory. So, and I do believe the developer has the intention to make these commercial. However, if someone buys a stratified unit, they can do whatever they want. So we need to figure out how to, even though it's zoned, how do we ensure that we maintain the integrity of the commercial spaces below? So I'm looking a little bit to staff to help guide us there, and whether or not there's something, can we do an amendment to the motion that would make sure that we're codifying that in this DP?
Staff would really prefer if it was sent back to staff, because there's a few things that we need to work out if it's going to remain the same, how to secure those commercial spaces, to make sure that, there's washrooms, make sure they don't get stratified with the same unit necessarily. I'm just hesitant to suggest that we could address it by amending the motion.
So, without that, I probably can't support this. It looks like a 4-3 vote. Even if it was a 3-3, it would fail. So, I'm just thinking of out loud council's options. Should we defeat this motion, we can refer it back to staff to work on particularly the commercial liability aspect.
Yes, that's the staff
And bring it
recommendation.
back for reconsideration. All right, I will call a question on the motion. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Chappelle, Race, Elliott, and myself opposed. Motion fails. I'll move that we refer this to staff to work with the proponent to ensure that commercial designations remain commercial.
Viable.
Sorry?
Viable.
Bible and I don't particularly want to speak to, I'm not going to put forward a motion on the variances. Another councillor can do that if they so choose, but I'll move that. There's second. Second by Councillor Race. I think we've spoken a lot about this. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Anybody else want to put forward any other motion? Seeing none, we'll move on in the agenda. Thank you, everyone. Amendment to public hearing date for the Squamish zoning bylaw 2020-2011 amendment bylaw 1861 Mantown Road, number 2509-2016.
Yes, so I believe we're waiting for some information, and the applicants have asked if we could delay the public hearing.
Okay, so we just want to consider this motion? Okay. Moved by Councillor Ray, second by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Number 3, carbon neutral reserve, early release funds.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Beth Winford, Sustainability Coordinator, District of Squamish. This evening, staff are here to request Council's authorization for early release of funds in the 2017 budget in order to begin work to establish a local carbon marketplace. So just in December, Council passed the following motion that Council supports the development of the community carbon marketplace and directs staff to enter into an agreement with Cowichan Energy Alternatives as sole source decision based on the organization's expertise and proven experience. Prior to executing the agreement, staff would like to ensure adequate funding for the initiative. As we've already staff have been directed to enter into the agreement, we're seeking the approval to spend $23,514 prior to the final adoption of the 2017-2021 draft financial plan. And the early release will allow staff to continue to follow the timeline outlined in the agreement, which also allows us to accommodate the carbon neutral deadlines. So within the budget, 2017 budget, the proposed funding source for this was the Carbon Neutral Reserve Fund. There are any questions?
Any questions for staff?
And I missed the meeting where it was explained, but in 1 or 2 sentences, can you say what a carbon marketplace looks like?
In short, no. But what the program ultimately will develop is, or what this agreement outlines is that the Cowichan Energy Alternatives approaches interested parties throughout the community that are working on green initiatives that have the potential to ultimately sell carbon offsets. So that when the time comes that we are interested in purchasing offsets, we'll be purchasing them locally rather than from other sources.
Thank you.
Okay, I will move this motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Elliott. Any more questions, comments? This is great. This is, you know, very why we set up this reserve in the first place 10, 11 years ago. So, I'm good to see this move forward. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Planner, one-year contract or release of funds. 9A4 on your agenda. All paid in.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to conclude my quick presentation. My name is Jonas Valniškis. I'm the Director of Community Planning. And I'm here to present a proposal to provide early release for planning special projects funds. And there's 3 projects in particular that this early release would apply to.
Can you make that bigger?
Yes.
Oh, my glasses.
So the 3 projects that are scheduled for initiation and some for completion in 2017 is the finalizing the community amenity contribution policy. We have an interim policy, but we know that it needs work. The OCP review is getting finished this year, and the zoning bylaw rewrite will start at the end of this year. All 3 projects depend on one of the senior planners or both working on the project. In order to keep those 2 senior planners working on policy projects, the approach that we've been taking this year was to contract some of the application review out to a contract planner. So the second column that you see is the representation of the amounts that each project would be contributing to the contract planner position. The total is 60,000, and so this would be supplemented by a parental leave that we have in the planning department, which would get us to a 1-year contract position, which would have, we attract a much wider audience when we're hiring somebody if we can offer a 1-year contract rather than a 5 or a 6-month contract. And so the staff recommendation is that the district provide an early release for those 3 projects only for the contract planner portion of the project. So all those projects involve a public engagement, a budget, a small one for each, and then some consulting fees. The official community plan review has consulting fees, as well as zoning bylaw rewrite has consulting fees.
But we're only looking at doing a motion to release the ability for staff to go and hire the
That's
contract planner. Any questions for staff? I will make this, there's a second, or I'll speak to it, Councilor Ray seconds. Yeah, we've got a lot of projects that are midstream. We don't want to lose momentum on them, we want to get them done, and so, you know, I support this in the budget, and I support it being early release so we can continue without any gaps in our project. Anyone else want to speak to it? Councilor?
Yeah, I agree, and in particular, the OCP review and having somebody in-house is very important, and not just somebody that's engaged in our community for these projects. For exactly the reason we see tonight, there are a lot of land use issues, and we require expertise within our district to be able to complete those projects properly.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. 8B1, Kristall Turm lease terms. Rather happy sound.
That was the one I was mentioning that was people, right? It's on 73. That's planner. No, I meant this one. I had the page.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. Just here back to give Council an update on the expression of interest process for Kristall Turm. Just to recap, this first came to Council back in early September when we were looking to advertise expressions of interest on district land. September 20th, we put out the advertisements. October 18th, we received, that was the cutoff date for all the expressions, so we did receive an expression of interest from Kristall Turm for the Adventure Center parking lot. And then just back before Christmas, we came in to talk to council to see whether council wanted us to move forward in the process with Kristall Turm at that point in time based on the proposal that they had submitted. And council directed staff to continue to move forward through to explore negotiations, but did request community feedback prior to considering any lease terms. So we put it on the district website, on the real estate page, and there was advertisements on Facebook asking for responses between December 23rd, I think, and January 10th. We got 151 responses through that process, and then subsequent to that, responses can have continued to come in and can have continued to come in even until this afternoon. So just in terms of when we wrote this report, we didn't have any of the responses post January 10th, so we tried to look at what we'd received and tried to categorize it. So at the time, based on the January 10th cutoff date, we had received 31 support for the project and support at that location of the 150 responses that we received. We had also received 53 responses that suggested support for the project, but we're not supportive of it in that location. And then we had 52 responses over here. Actually, you can't see my mouse, unfortunately, but the light gray was 52 responses that didn't really speak to the project, but were not supportive of that location. And then we had 9 outrights, don't like the project, don't like the location. So depending on how I look at it, I mean, we had, of the 151 responses, over 110 responses that did not support that location, whether they support the project or not. And we did have about 80 responses up in the top half of the dark greens, or like mid greens and dark greens, where there was support for the project, but not all of it was for that location. So, and what we heard, and then subsequent to that, we've got 150, and they just continue to roll in, especially since we put the report out on the agenda last week. We noticed an uptick in responses, and strong concerns were raised in those responses about the use of this parking lot for this project. And what we heard specifically was, it came in sort of key categories. We broke it down, and what we heard was a lot of concerns about the Smoke Bluffs parking lot. Out of the 153 first set of responses that we heard, there was over 50 mentions about the Smoke Bluffs parking lot. We heard, I think, around 25 to 30 mentions about concerns over visitor parking, tourist parking, and we also heard concerns over commuter parking, and a small number of concerns about using having private business on district land. And then in the 150 that came in post, we hadn't had time to tabulate them in the same way, but we skimmed through them and we noticed similar themes coming through those ones as well. So this is the first time we've done this process from a leasing perspective. So we had promised to come back to council mid-January to give them some feedback on the community engagement prior to moving into negotiations. So in preparation for this, we decided to take a closer look at what were the impacts of the proposal based on, not just on the proposal that we received, but we tried to look at how does it lay out with potential parking layouts for this property and what the impacts might be on the overall property. And then we looked, we got a lot of feedback, and a lot of really good feedback, and a lot of interesting feedback. And so we looked at it and we thought, well, how do we address this? How do we respond to this? What sense do we make of this? So we started to work through that. So what you'll see here is a map that shows in dark red. That is laid out by our engineering department, albeit fairly quickly in response, because we only had a week to put this together. But what you're seeing is a potential parking layout that could work at the Adventure Center in an ideal world if it was paved and lined and delineated. And that parking lot, and that also leaves significant drive aisles across through each parking lane. And again, you can't see my mouse, but there's also a lane that goes all the way around the outside. So you probably could squeeze more in, but we just thought to be conservative, we wanted to leave a fair bit of room there as well. And there's dotted lines on the outside towards the channel, and the yellow dotted line is a setback from the top of the dike, and we don't want any parking or anything going into the yellow area. you can have parking over the white dotted line, if you can see that on the map. There's that white dotted line, which is another 15-meter setback from the bottom slope of the dike. You can have vehicle parking in there and movement, but not structures. So based on that, we took the proposal from Kristall Turm.
Just a clarification,
Yeah.
can you show exactly what the proposed forestry center?
So that would be, again, I'm not sure why the mouse doesn't work on here, but there is that down at the bottom 2 rows of parking, the top, the 2 bottom rows of red, there's a white triangle, or white rectangle, and there's some text at the bottom that says proposed forestry center on an angle at the very bottom of the picture. So the proposed center goes from the very bottom there where that dotted line is up to the top of the 2nd row of parking, which is just above the crosswalk, Loggers Lane there. So, and we can actually have a map here we can pass out as well that has it a little bit clearer. So basically, if you look at the row of parking just below the proposed phase 1, where there's 6 cars and there's 1 white car up against Loggers Lane, that row is the dividing line. Is that clear? I want to make sure that is clear.
I think so, and that's the lease area, and a portion of that is parking, and a portion of that is
Correct.
building.
Yeah, the proposal that we have from the forestry center does not, right now, they're proposing to include their parking within their lease area. So conceivably that would be, hopefully that would play out, that would be the case. So what we're left with is, as it stands now, we looked at how to potentially lay out the Kristall Turm more in line with the parking layout as opposed to what we received from Kristall Turm. And it looks as though, and this isn't, again, 100% accurate, but it's going to be fairly close, that their structure and surrounding areas for phase 1 would take plus or minus 30 stalls of this potential 196 stalls. That would leave 166 available. Once the Forestry Museum comes on board, that number of available spaces goes down from 166 down to 78 stalls that would be left over for parking. Again, acknowledging that this is the ideal parking layout, not exactly what we're dealing with today. So I'd like to move on, if that's okay, to the next slide. Okay. So then we did another layout, which would be proposal, or what would it look like if the phase 2 that was proposed by Kristall Turm in their expression, that would move to a larger structure as business and circumstances could dictate or warrant. That's obviously a significantly bigger structure, and it's hard to see on the overhead, but there's a blue center area, and then there's a blue diagonal around it. And then the purple area would be the area that would probably be needed to accommodate their structure and enough parking to support that within their lease area. All right, the proposals that we have here would have them containing their parking within their lease areas and not competing with parking outside of the lease area.
On that topic, yep, go ahead.
So the numbers don't add up to the stalls that are available here. So I'm just looking at, it says 28 stalls, plus or minus 28 stalls of parking, but it only has in the 18 stalls and no facilities whatsoever, just the structure. And then outside as well, there's only 12, 13, 18 parking spaces actually available with the structures built.
So can you clarify the parking?
Yeah. So on this one, what we added up was everything outside of the purple line to the west of that purple line between Loggers Lane and the purple was, when I calculated, I thought we were looking at 30 stalls in that area. So I'm just going to count them. So we have 5 rows of 6 stalls between the purple lines and Loggers Lane, which would be the 30 stalls that would be available after the Forestry Center was built, and presuming the Kristall Turm filled up the purple area. Inside the purple area, we've identified that they would be utilizing 28 stalls, but the total impact for them would be 78 because they're going to chew up 50 parking stalls with their structure. So
and that's phase 2.
In phase 2. So inside the purple area, there's a total impact of 78 stalls, but there's 28 that would only be available for parking to meet their parking requirements.
The other 50 they just disappear with the structure itself, leaving that parking area with 30 stalls to the left or the west of the purple line between Loggers Lane and the structure.
And can you do that same analysis for only phase one? So we understand that too?
Go back to phase one.
Is that okay, Councilor Chappelle, just want to?
Do you want me to?
Phase one.
Okay. So in phase one, again, if you look inside the purple area, their parking impact is, that would take away 30 stalls of the overall lot. Under that structure, they only require 10 parking stalls to support the parking requirements of their operation. But we've operated from the premise that they would need to put their parking within their lease area. So the structure there takes 30 stalls, of which 10 is left over for parking, and then around it, all around that purple, to the left and to the north, not to the south, because that's where anything to the south of the purple would be for the forestry center. Everything to the left and to the above it would a total 78 parking stalls if you add them all up.
And at this point with the forestry center, we don't know how much is a building footprint versus how much parking would be associated with
Their
that.
footprint is roughly half. I mean, I do have a slide at the back end of this if you need to see it, but basically the area that the Forestry Museum would take up is, I'd say the building is probably 40%, and the parking in the back area would be about 40%. There's sort of a 20% area for access and ingress and egress and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So there's no facilities, it's just a structure at all? There's no retail facilities,
So
there's
at this
storage
point,
facilities?
so through you, Mayor, at this point, the proposal is that they would, they're exploring the possibility of accessing a kiosk inside the Adventure Center to have the retail sales through a kiosk at the Adventure Center and utilizing the washing facilities. If that isn't practical as time plays out, then they could install porta potties and things or whatever is required at that point in time. But part of the idea here is actually is to drive traffic into that building as well. It's an opportunity to increase visitation to the building as well.
And leasing out the kiosk would be a separate
Piece, yeah.
Anything else? Good so far? I mean, why don't we let staff continue on with the report? Just want to make sure clarification gets done up.
So, in dealing with the considerable community feedback that we received, we started to look at, okay, well, how does this, how can this be addressed? So, to see whether or not there's other opportunities here than just this parking lot that we have at the Adventure Center to help with this situation. Obviously, we've heard loud and clear that there's concerns over the smoke bluffs and parking expansion or parking needs. So there is a proposal to expand the parking at Smoke Bluffs. This is a project, I believe, that's identified in the DCC bylaw at roughly $125,000. It hasn't made its way, my understanding, into the budget yet, but it is something that's been identified in the Squamish parking strategy, 2016 to 2020, which is to look at designs and parking for trailhead expansion on the Smoke Bluffs parking lot. So I wanted to bring that to council's attention in considering this process here. The other thing that we found in the Squamish parking strategy is the potential for commuter parking, which we heard was really important through this process. And that there is some wording and direction in the parking strategy to also look at this location on Loggers Lane, which is just north of Pemberton, between Pemberton and Hunter Place, just west of that BC Hydro substation. Again, there's a possibility to look at creating a commuter hub here as well, and which is still relatively close to Highway 99 and not that far from the existing parking at the Adventure Center. We also reached out to Tourism Squamish. They operate the Visitor Information Center. They have submitted a response through the mail process here as well, and wanted to get an understanding of where they were at, and also to get an understanding and figuring they would be a good source of information on the aspect of visitor parking. So what we received from them was actually interesting. They pointed out that that the Adventure Center employs over 18 people, and so there's the potential to need some requirements for employee parking and all this that to be considered. They figured that they need at least a minimum of 30 2 parking spots. They did an actual calculation based on visitation numbers and how many people visit the building on a regular basis. And they calculated through that, based on hours of the day, that they needed around 32 parking stalls at a minimum to manage visitor traffic. And there's 14 stalls on the paved lot right out front of the Adventure Center. So they figured that we would need at least 18 minimum in the gravel lot across the road. And did acknowledge that they felt that over time that could grow as well, up to potentially 60 spots that would be needed on the gravel lot across the road. Also point out that the lot can reach capacity at peak times. Again, without the property being managed, no one really knows, who's who and who's there. But they did acknowledge that there are times in that peak periods when that parking lot can be full. And so what they've suggested in terms of something to help address visitor parking issues is that there should be a 30-minute maximum in the paved lot to get people who want to use the paved lot who are just coming in for a quick visit. And they're actually put on the table that we consider putting a 3-hour maximum on the gravel lot, recognizing that their concern is making sure that they're representing Tourism Squamish, the Visitor Information Center. They want to see that traffic turns over in that parking lot so there's always spots available for the visitors. And they acknowledge that there's 2, they think that there may be need for 2 bus parking spots as well. So in terms of a recommendation, there was a recommendation in the report, which was to continue negotiations with Kristall Turm. I just want to provide a little bit of background on where staff came to in that recommendation. This is a tough one because there really is no policy to help guide this situation. We've never done community feedback before on a lease proposal. The parcel itself doesn't have really a whole lot of documentation and policy around how that property is supposed to be used. So we looked back and we just said, previous direction we had from council on December 20th was to negotiate with Kristall Turm. And we wanted council to be aware of this community feedback and the due diligence that we did before we actually came in and recommended against that direction, recognizing that it's council's decision. So on that, I'll turn it back to council.
Questions for staff? Any report or anything in the quick question, perhaps through our Director of Finance. My understanding was that the Smoke Bluffs parking expansion was in last year's financial plan scheduled for this year.
I would have to check, but I know that there was a culvert or some kind of culvert. It's phase 1, but certainly there's nothing there this year, so I'll have to go back. I don't recall there being a stage 2.
I believe it was in last year's financial plan that it was going to be
I'll have a
this
quick
year's
look.
financial plan, and I'm not sure it's made the cut in this year's. Date.
I don't remember seeing it this year, no.
Christine, it didn't make the cut.
Well, we haven't approved the budget, so it's not currently in.
Not currently in the budget.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
That's fine.
And just to clarify what the DCCs mean in terms of funding that project. With regard to it being a DCC eligible project, is it under a roads aspect? And so half of it, or 54% would be funded through DCCs, but there would be a municipal portion that we would have to.
They're saying it's under P9, the Parks DCC.
Would be parks, it would be park acquisition, okay. Councillor Blackenmore.
Yeah, and I don't know if the relevant staff is in the room, but one of the questions that I had was whether or not there was a possibility of beefing up the shoulders on Loggers Lane between where the Adventure Center parking lot is, all the way up to the entrance of where the Smoke Bluffs parking lot entrance is, and sort of basically there's sort of a small gravel shoulder on both sides. And if there is a possibility of enhancing that so that it could serve as an overflow on-street parking that wouldn't be blocking the street, recognizing that there is no bike lane or sidewalk on these stretches of roads. So,
Mr. Buxton?
Yeah, I did. Mr. Ross and Mr. Simmons sort of kicked this idea around. The east side, the east shoulder is sort of a no-go because it's right on that on that creek, and that's a fairly significant salmon-bearing creek. The west side has some better potential. It's a lot easier to deal with. It's not easy, but it's easier. I think our preference would be to actually undertake this rather than improvements to the road. I think this would be a better solution.
Yeah, no, and I'm thinking even, maybe even and, if we got to the point where that was still not quite enough, but just recognizing that, you know, if this goes ahead and, you know, that's logically going to be the place for climbers to park rather than in the Adventure Center parking lot because it's closer, and then once that fills up, the next easiest place to park would be on the street because it's still closer, but yeah, that was just my thought, at least as far as knowing that might be possible, because again, these things are just like peak timing, right? And do we want to be creating giant parking lots all of the time? They're only used a few days a year, but I like this idea.
Councillor Chappelle?
Thanks. You know, I think there's a giant miss in this report, thinking that, first of all, the fact that our Adventure Center, this idea that it needs activation is not accurate. It's been voted number 3 in all of the Lower Mainland, Vancouver, and the North Shore as the best place to enjoy outdoor activities. So I'm not sure how we just think of it as a place where we need 3-hour parking. People come to this parking lot to enjoy the outdoors and our naturally unscripted lifestyle. And they park in the parking lot and they go for 5-6 hour rides. They go for hikes. They climb the smoke bluffs all day. They use it to run and run, you know, they use it to walk downtown. We have no parking. Parking has been the biggest concern of our citizens, clearly. We've had more engagement on this project than any other project, pretty much, including LNG. We've had international responses, people from all over the world saying that using up an active transportation parking lot where you're not driving into neighborhoods and parking, where you're actually allowed to centralize your parking, it's our park and ride for Vancouver. We haven't engaged a bus company that actually uses that parking lot to transfer people. 40% of our economy leaves town every day to go to work in Vancouver. Probably more now, that's 2011 numbers. And they take the bus, and that's where they park. So how can we even consider 3-hour parking in a parking lot that's our active, we say park and ride. There's a park and ride sign even on here, it says park and ride. So there's not going to be a 3-hour parking limit in this particular parking lot. It is our only parking lot. So I'm not sure how we got to the point of
We are
3-hour.
We are considering it.
Okay,
This
good.
is sadly,
That's like,
no, Tourism Squamish,
Yeah.
as staff articulate, Tourism Squamish made some
said
comments,
this is,
and they said you can consider these things to help manage
but one of the
parking.
suggestions was making
It
it,
was, but no
okay,
one's
good. But I think that's a big miss to think that, you know, using up any parking at this time is inadequate. I'll listen to the other comments before, but I just,
Yeah, I'm trying to
That's
focus in on
makes
questions
exactly.
first. So, council, any questions? I have one question. Can you go back to the photograph of just the whole and face? That's fine. Yeah. In order to, the Forestry Center might be here in a year, might be here in 4 years. You know, we'll plan for it. We've strategized for it. In the meantime, and it looks like a fairly big project too, certainly if we were able to pay this big project. How would we maximize, and this is a conversation we should have regardless of if we move forward with the lease with Kristall Turm or not, but how do we maximize parking ability in that area for a relatively, I'm not sure if this is a question for Mr. Plummer, Mr. Buxton, but for a relatively small amount of money or for as little as possible?
So through you, Mayor, I did have a chat with engineering this morning to just get a rough idea of what we could possibly do. And the first thing that we talked about was either, you know, small curbs or even no posts. I mean, in shopping malls right now, you don't have anything necessarily that separates cars, so you don't necessarily have to have a no post to separate vehicles. But something to create the effect of these lines, that these center lines between the two parking stalls. And what we could do is put either small curbs or no post, depending on how we want to do it. The small curbs would probably run, the number I got, and this was really quick in ballpark, 5,000 to 8,000 plus or minus, depending on how everything's plays out. For the curbs, and then for the no post, it would be more in the $15,000 to $20,000 range to create this alignment right here that you're seeing on the map.
And when you mean no post, you mean sort of the...
No posts are the ones that are higher. They
Got
actually
it.
create a physical separation so the cars can't actually
Yeah.
park into each other. But
When you're talking curbs, you're talking almost like the gondola parking lot, they're just those low form
Yeah,
cement.
just to create a line so people know where they can pull into and they can see it on both sides. They pull in, there's a curb stop there and a curb stop there. It creates some sense. That's just the starting point. We didn't get too far into it, but that was one of the things. And obviously signage as well would help us articulate that.
With regard to phase 1 versus phase 2, because they dramatically affect the area, how important is phase 2 to the development? And if we limited it to just phase 1, how does that reflect on the viability of the project?
So I can answer that from discussions I've had with Kristall Turm, is that phase 2, because I asked that same question, phase 2 was expressed as being an important option that they would like to be considered in the context of this lease. And if I say this incorrectly, I'm not sure if Mr. Gomez is here, if he can re-qualify it for me, but my understanding is that they would like to have that option in there that the district would consider at a later date, phase 2, recognizing that it's going to go through a process of council. It would be council's discretion. But if they can come in and demonstrate that they have, that the growth of this to phase 2 can be done in a way that doesn't create an undue impact on the Adventure Center or the Smoke Bluffs or anything else, they would want council to consider that. And so, in that, if council wants to look at that, there's ways we could word that in a lease. We could put time frames that says, that couldn't happen until, a later date. We need to need maybe a year at least to figure out or more how this is going to play out, get a better sense as to where the Forestry Museum is at. Those are types of things that you could work into a lease agreement. But I know that it was expressed that it's important to have that on file and have that on the lease so that it's not lost, especially if it's another council that would be looking at this down the road.
Councillor Chappelle, in a second. I just want to, we have a few members of the public here. We have the proponent here. Typically, this isn't a public hearing process, so legislatively, there's no requirement that we hear from the public in the meeting. This is a brand new process. Usually dispositions of land legally under the community charter can all be done in camera. It's basically a negotiation. Council about a year ago changed it up so we could bring in public input into the process. So the actual disposition of it is a public process. I do, there are a few people in the audience, so I do actually want to offer opening up the floor to the audience. I do ask that people not repeat each other, just so we can be a perspective. Totally welcome that. We just don't want it to get too repetitive. We got a lot of correspondence on this, so I think we've heard a lot of the issues, but I do want to make sure that the public has an opportunity to speak to it. So if you're the proponent, or if you're someone else in the public who would like to speak to specific aspects, ask questions, please let me know. I'm going to go to you in a second. I just want to make sure that the whole conversation, I just wanted to bring that up to let everybody know. Neil, are we pretty much done with your presentation at this point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Council, are there any more questions? I saw Councillor Chappelle's hand.
No one always, I'd like to hear from the public, so I'll make this one.
So if you'd like to speak, please come up and just state your name, and if you represent an organization or business, please, or yourself, please articulate that.
I'm Kristall, with the president of the Squamish Access Society.
Welcome.
For the same reason that Mario obviously likes this site, because it's highway access and so forth, like what we see in the future in the corridor is there's going to be a huge parking issue. There's already huge parking issues at Mirren, at the Chief, the gondola, and if LNG goes through and they lose, the gondola loses their parking there, we already have huge problems with parking. And we feel that this site here represents a really good opportunity for a recreational shuttle bus kind of park and ride area that would be able to go from this site to up to, all the way up to maybe Brome with kind of drop off. And that system works very well in US national parks. It's the same system that they've used. It's working in Yosemite, it works in Zion. It seems to be that this is a very short-sighted use of this land. The expansion to the Smoke Bluffs parking lot is an important component of the parking problem that's happening here. But I think there needs to be a more regional think between parks, MOT, the district, Whistler. Everybody needs to come up because the highway is not going to, the capacity of the highway is not going to expand, and everybody bringing up their car up here. As you said, we can continue to expand parking, but that is a long-term solution that is not very carbon friendly for one, and it's just going to be continuing to add resources to something that just doesn't make any sense. And we need to have some other solutions, and we see this area as being central to that because it's very easy to get in and off of the highway off of it, and easy to turn around to get back onto the highway without any extra infrastructure. And we just see this as a very short-sighted use of this land. Also, the fact that you already have commuter and the YVR bus coming in here, it seems like a really, but I understand from Mayor's perspective, he has instant traffic coming in there. So I understand from a business perspective, this is an attractive site to him. But we see that there's other higher end uses for this land that would be better in the long term. Anyways, that's what I need to say.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who would like to speak, come up, state your name and your street address, and you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
Sorry, this is a double shot. I'm first going to speak for the Climbers Access Society.
You're not two people, you're one person, right?
I've written to both accounts. I just wanted to add what Chris said in that we would obviously support an expansion of the Smoke Bluff parking lot itself. And it's kind of a funny issue in that if this goes ahead, you may actually put forward that as a solution, which obviously benefits the park. So that is something that we do hope you strongly consider in the budget. It's always been important, and it's going to be even more important going forward. Now, Peter Winter, 3020 Guilford Drive. And this project, I'm not opposed to the project itself, but I am opposed to it in this location. And the parking issue, has been addressed at length here, but the gondola had it all laid out how much parking they were going to have. And what has happened to that? It has gone absolutely crazy. It's gone exponential. They've now pushed into the Squamish cheap parking lot. They pushed into by Darrell Bay, that whole parking zone. So you can see what happens, and that's my concern as a resident with this, is I keep hearing, oh, this amount of parking is earmarked for this facility, this amount of parking is earmarked for that. Those numbers don't mean anything. I mean, Squamish is literally going exponential. I don't even think your planners can forecast that anymore. I mean, it's insane. So to put a project like that will draw lots of people, trust me. Same as the gondola. I think something like that, especially again why he wants it there, people will be driving by and will see it and will be, oh my God, what's that? Let's go. And you will have parking cars coming out of your ears. And further to that, being that it is so visible from the highway, again, you've spent how much money on that adventure center. Now everybody as they drive by is going to be looking at that ropes course because it's something totally different. They're not going to be looking at the adventure center. And we need that to be the focal point of that area and of Squamish. I'm tired of people referencing Squamish as turn left at McDonald's. Right? Now it's going to be, oh, you pull over at the ropes course. It should be this beautiful adventure center, look at the smoke bluffs, the chief, whatever. So you've heard from me before about highway development, but I'm very anti that. Obviously from a business perspective, it's desirable. But I think as a community, we're going to be very careful with those types of things because we'll become a Niagara Falls, which if you haven't been, the falls are beautiful, the town is an absolute nightmare. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. And maybe the proponent can answer this. I would like to get some clarity because I appreciate the comment about the gondola. My understanding about this one is that there's only a certain amount of people who can be on this structure at once. And So, you know, you're not gonna be able to put 500 people on the structure, you can put X amount. Mind you, there might be people lined up or whatever. I just want to get an understanding of where this potential scope creep that was mentioned could go to on this type of facility, and maybe staff can answer that when I clarify that. So we can understand that potential.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mario Gomez, 38030 7th Avenue. So the phase one would be about maximum about 40 people at once. So usually, you know, people come. It is a family attraction. It is from kids to about 4 or 5 years to adults at different skill levels. So usually they come in groups. It's very rare for an attraction like that somebody would come alone in a car. So we have 40 people on the tower at a time. Typically, that would be at peak times, which would mean about 10 to 14 cars that would take care of the structure. Couple of other very quick things I wanted to just mention is one is that phase two, that blue line that is the whole area. This is not, we're not the ones that were defining that. This was the area that was put up on the expressions of interest out there.
The purple line, you mean?
The purple line,
Yeah.
yes. So it's not that we said we want to use that whole area for phase two or phase one or whatever. You know, we basically were answering that expression of interest. And that's another point I wanted to raise as well, is that it's a fine line of all of a sudden, becoming a bit of the villain that, we saw that ad, that was something that we started the idea last year, didn't go through. We have truly pretty much given up on the idea of putting something there. And then we saw the ad, one of the people that work with me saw the ad on the paper and said, well, they're putting expressions of interest on this. And then we are actually, debating, do we answer, don't we answer, and there was some people saying, oh, you guys should really answer, and then, we decided to answer because we do, think it is a family attraction that people would love. We do have, as a business, bringing something like this to Squamish with 20,000 people is a huge risk, no doubt. Those structures are typically on larger centers. So given the location, it is obviously, a great location, then decided to answer. But we just wanted to make a point as well that we were just one of, as I understand, several people that have answered that expression of interest. I think that's it for now. If you have any other questions about the project itself. Oh, and one more thing, yes, about phase one and phase two. So what we said is that we would just like to have on the lease a mention that, reference phase two and says that would be at council discretion, but just to have something there that, who knows, that might happen 4 years, 5 years from now, when it's a totally new council and people would say, where did you come up with the idea of a phase two, right? So we just wanted to have that documented, but that would be at your discretion. Phase one, the tower itself takes only 14 to 16 parking spots. Again, the parking, whether it has to be those spots just for the tower or whether we, would have it as a, how do you say, as a shared parking, we would be totally fine with that as well. Thank you.
And there's been lots of really good feedback on this. There has been some feedback that hasn't been fair to the proponent. There are no villains in this. The proponent, in good faith, responded to an expression of interest. Council wanted to throw it out there to see what sort of interest is out there and how, and opened up the process to public engagement. So I think everyone's intent is good. There have been some nasty correspondences and vilified the proponent, and that's really uncalled for. And I want to thank the proponent for being very proper and correct and civilized in his approach. As I said, most of the correspondence was really good, really productive, really clear. There were some that were just simply untrue and uncalled for, and I just feel I need to mention that. Questions for staff, or if anyone else would like to come speak, come on up, state your name and street address, if you represent yourself, a business or an organization. And who here needs to go to the bathroom? Okay, sorry, you don't have to answer that question.
I could take a poll.
Sorry, I said that out loud, I didn't mean to.
Insight this.
My name's Jeff Levine. I live at House 7 at 1589 Eagle Run Drive. I'm here representing our business, Kristall Adventure Company. We're tenants in the building. I have struggled with this proposal, and because I think it's the proposal itself is something that's needed in Squamish. We do need this venue. I have a unique experience of being front and center of all the people coming into the Visitor Information Center. One thing I think the visitor stats that are not captured are the sheer numbers of people coming in by bus. Stand in the visitor center and stand there for 2 or 3 hours around between 9 o'clock till noon, and there's hundreds of people coming in by bus. They're using it as a stop for Squamish. I see this parking lot as underutilized. I think it could be organized much better than it is. If you can look at the way to look at that, look how much space there is between cars. There's sometimes 2 and 3 feet between cars. It's so haphazard. I do understand the concerns of some of the other people saying about smoke bluffs, the access to the smoke bluffs. However, I see a dangerous precedent being set if we're telling people to park here to walk down the road down to the smoke bluff parking lot. I don't know if anyone's actually tried to do that on a busy day. Usually what happens is people, if they are walking down, they're walking down the south side of the road, and it's a bit of a traffic hazard. They're not on the sidewalk. So I've seen cars on narrowly missing people because they're just walking down the side of the road because they're going to the smoke bluffs parking. I think the best option here is to increase the size of the smoke bluff parking. And if we can organize the parking so that it's parked better, and if this is such a high value area, no disrespect to the commuters, but if it's such a high value area that we want our people to come up here and explore adventures, maybe it's an idea to put the people that are parking on an everyday basis, that are literally getting into a bus at 7:30 in the morning and coming back at 5, 6 o'clock at night, maybe it might be an idea to put that parking lot somewhere else, because they're not adding anything to the adventure center. They're not adding anything to our tourism, but yet they are still very valuable to the community because they live here. So maybe that's a bigger discussion that we could have. Maybe put those parking rides so it's just not empty cars. And typically the commuters that I see, it's 1 person per car. And they're parking there and they're catching their bus. But when people are coming up for adventures, it's 2, 3, 4 people per car. So I'm in favor of this proposal as phase 1. It does give a great opportunity for families. Yes, we do have amazing rock climbing in the area. However, not everyone's experienced enough to take their kids rock climbing in the back. And they don't have the experience, but yet there's a lot of people that could benefit by going on such a thing. And this expression of interest was put forth by the District of Squamish, and the proponent went forward with it. It wasn't, it was someone else's idea. It was put forth by the District of Squamish, and it seems it's a little narrow-sighted to say just because now you think it's going to be too popular, we don't want you, but if it was something less popular, we would like it.
Thank you. And staff did outline one alternative for parking ride in the downtown area. That's part of the conversation, absolutely. I don't think you can disassociate any of the parking issue conversations with each other. Anyone else in the public who would like to speak to this issue? I thank everyone who has spoken. Council, any further questions?
Can I speak?
Yeah, come on up and state your name and street address, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
Douglas, I live 2 blocks away at 3100 Third Avenue. I just got a couple of things that you might not have noticed about this proposal. As you can see there, it's a big parking lot.
Sorry, just ask you to speak into the microphone.
As you can see there, it's a big parking lot. We all know that. I've walked across that in the last 17 years thousands of times. One thing I have noticed that you haven't noticed, as we all know, we've got one of the best ports in the world here. We have a lot of big pipe come off those, out of those boats and come down to here. Unfortunately, there's nowhere really, when you have a super wide load, to park to go get a coffee. Well, I've seen many a time a big long rig with those super wide pipes there. There's nowhere else they can park along this road or along the sea to sky to actually park, go get a coffee, and then get back on the highway again. Okay, so you're basically going to make truck drivers have to go there and drive to the bridge without ever having a coffee in their hand, which we all know we like. Another point I'd like to point out is a lot of people on the right-hand side of that use that parking lot, especially the people that live in vans and climb, that's what they call the dirtbag rock climbers. A lot of them where those trees are, you'll see them in the morning when I walk up to Bluffs, so they park under those trees to have a nice breakfast in the shade. If you park this, you'll cut out those trees. It's a great parking lot. I've walked across it for years. It's been put to so much use, and it's such a waste of time to think you people would put 3-hour parking on that. What are you thinking? 3-hour parking? Okay, it's going to take half an hour to walk downtown. It's going to take another half hour to walk back. But people get 2 hours to walk downtown. Any idea of putting a time limit on parking in this town? It's ridiculous. People come here to enjoy nature, not worry about whether their car is going to be towed. I mean, I love this town. I don't like Squamish, I love it. Okay, I've lived here for 17 years, and I hate to think the fact that I grew up in Georgian Bay, and the last time I went back there 7 years ago, it's all paved. And it's so sad to see so much greenery getting paved. And it's so sad to see so many beautiful views of Squamish being destroyed by these horrible, ugly, large buildings you are putting up over 2 stories. There's so many views of it. I mean, what's the history of this town? We're going to walk downtown, we're not going to be able to see the Jeep. I'm just saying, maybe progress isn't the greatest thing. And I hate to see a parking lot like that, which is used so much by the climbers in general, and especially with the way the parking has gone last year. I mean, it's gone crazy. I've never seen it like this in all my lifetime. But this is a real issue for me here, and I've never gone to City Hall in my life. But this is an important thing to me, because climbers mean a lot to me, and tourism means a lot to me in this town. And what are you going to do? If you start putting in 3-hour parking, you're going to drive tourists away. And parking, as they say, is a really big issue in this town right now. I mean, downtown, if you didn't have the Red Apple, and thank God that's closing, at least that'll leave you some more space. But, I mean, you've got to stop paving everything. And just as a word of warning, if you ever pave small bluffs, I'll buy a pickaxe. Have a great day, folks.
Thank you very much. Council's not considering 3-hour parking in the parking lot, and I don't think we're considering paving anything at this point at all, from what I've heard. Anyway, any more comments from public? Council, do you have questions? Any more questions? No. What's that?
Comments?
Absolutely. Go ahead. Yeah.
So actually, I feel extremely passionately about this, as you all have ascertained. I actually wrote this down so I could be succinct, because I tend to ramble if I'm not. So do you mind if I just, it's short?
Not at all. The floor is yours.
Perfect. So citizens who value public space have sent letters from around the world. This has been more engagement than we had in most projects. Many citizens value active public transportation network provided by being able to park and ride and take the Squamish commuter to Vancouver in the morning at this location. 40% of our population commutes to work, and it seems reasonable to have a lot for them to park in and possibly activate the Adventure Center by opening it for coffee in the morning to those communities would be an asset. Council made this lot into its park and ride for a reason, and that was because there was no other lots available. We invite tourism through our natural setting, through outdoor activities, and through our unscripted lifestyle and beautiful surroundings. The Adventure Center provides a building where people can gather for sports. There is no other building in the world that serves this purpose, that is a not-for-profit structure, that's a community gathering area, and it's a requirement, and its only requirement is community. The Smoke Bluffs is a family-friendly attraction that is free and also equitable. We don't charge admission to the Smoke Bluffs. Kids can climb there. My kids started climbing at age 2 in the Smoke Bluffs. It doesn't take special requirement. Our unscripted lifestyle actually invites kids to come and explore the outdoors at all ages. We have, 3 and 4-year-olds that are hucking jumps. To say that it's prohibitive and we need to build scaffolding in this particular location so that people can pay to get in and climb, I find it inequitable. The thought of a privatized business setting up that'll be fenced in for many months of the year and not actually open and uses public facilities when other businesses have to build their own places on our own land with taxpayer facilities and bathrooms. Local businesses rely on these resources that we pay tax for to make this a pleasant place to be, to provide space and parking and nature. I've lived here to enjoy being in nature, and I accept density within infrastructure. I don't accept paying for I accept paying for public transportation as a way to provide equity. I do not accept using this particular piece of public land for private business except as a public resource, like a museum or a gallery, or if this land, or as this land is, a parking lot for carbon reduction and commuting. I don't disagree that this company is a highly valuable asset in Squamish. They're a local company. They're innovative. They're provide employment and taxes to the district. Their marketplace is in places that do not provide climbing areas and natural areas, and they are required in places that need social recreation and team building. I feel like Squamish does all of that in the woods. We're lucky to have access to one of the world's most beautiful granite climbing parks and partnerships between the municipality and the Squamish Access Society. The issue that hasn't been brought up yet is Cleveland Avenue. Cleveland Avenue has been identified as the most dangerous intersection in town. Why in heck would we want to put tourism attractions that make the intersection even busier? We have no way yet to get pedestrians into this area safely, nor bikes. We don't have this asset yet. Someday we will. The council should listen to well over 100 angry citizens on the decision that they put forward, that we have the ability, we had to rezone, advertise, and accept a lease with very little engagement. The public noticed. They noticed enough to watch the video 135 times and go to the page 450 times. I would think this qualifies as public engagements, more engagement than our OCP. So I accept that this may be a valuable asset for Squamish, but like any other private business, it should be looking for private land. And using a public asset for private leases right now is something that I can't support until we have a parking plan, until we have a plan for this entire area that's comprehensive. And just looking for immediate activation when Vancouver considers this the third best resource in the entire Lower Mainland for active transportation and for active outdoor recreation. It seems like a ridiculous proposal to even just think about leasing this land. It really rips at my moral fiber right now, and I've had a lot of online engagement and feel slightly responsible for the pouring of comments, but I moved here to climb for the same reason that a lot of other people have. And this lot is a place where I can park with my kids and walk right across the street to our trail network that leads right to the smoke bus. And if we find it dangerous walking on the road, we can put in a crosswalk. There's acceptable ways that we can manage transit and pedestrian and bike traffic in this area. And I also find it unacceptable sending, it was 80 people every 2 hours was the original, what the traffic report that the proponent brought forward. So all the numbers are really low from what staff has presented. And driving those, I can't imagine a kid in this area having to run across the road to use a bathroom. It makes no sense to me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. I think if we're going to become positional, we should know what we're positioning ourselves on, and we don't have a motion on the floor. So I'm open to entertaining a motion from council. Councillor Race.
Yeah, I'll move the staff recommendation that we proceed with negotiations with Kristall Turm for the proposed aerial ropes course.
Seconded by Councillor Elliott. So just so we know what we're speaking to, Councillor Race.
Yeah, thank you. I just try to focus the conversation a little bit. I've read a lot of emails over the last few days. I think all of us have. And there were some points that were raised in those emails that I did want to touch on. First of all, the concept of the district leasing out district lands to private businesses is not at all new. It already happens on this site, Mr. Levine's company being one of them. One close by, for everybody's information, is the Copper Coil, which is a private business operating on public lands, or parkland, as a matter of fact. So there's a number of different examples. It's not a unique thing. It's not a new thing. we do that to maximize use of the lands and also to get revenue for the district. So nothing unusual about that. I have to say my vision for this land has frankly never been just as a parking lot. Ever since the Adventure Center was built, I think back in 2003 or 4, I forget exactly when, I've always thought it was kind of orphaned on that site, and it needed something else. And I've supported over the years the concept of a forestry center that we've heard a little bit about, and I'm hopeful that that will show up there one day soon. And I've supported this because I think this is part of animating that site. To me, that means more than just people walking around getting off of buses. It means things to do, and to use this land, which is waterfront land actually, and visible from the highway, as just a parking lot, to me is a waste. I'm quite amazed how people seem to embrace automobiles lately, but I don't think that this is really the best use of this particular piece of property. I'm thankful to staff actually for coming up with some alternatives, because my view of this is if we have a parking problem and there's peak traffic from the smoke bluffs at certain times, well, personally I've never seen it. When I've gone by there, there's always been parking spots, but I take it that there are times when that lot is full. Then I think the solution is not to just stop development, not to stop attractions, not to stop employment. I think the solution is actually to find another place for people to go. And so the expansion of the Smoke Bluffs parking lot is something I could support. The expansion or the actual change in location of the commuter parking, I think is actually quite brilliant. I take Mr. Levine's point, it's really kind of just dead wasted space when you put a car there empty for 8 or 10 hours a day, taking up space in a lot that has other potential for commuter traffic. And so putting that somewhere else, and it probably could go almost anywhere else, is something I can support. It's an interesting concept to think of a bus that is sort of a shuttle bus back and forth between different attractions in the corridor. Once again, it doesn't have to go in this spot. We can try and find other spots for it. So I am in favor of some form of other activities on this site, and this is the proponent that's come forward. I will say, with respect to one other issue that was mentioned there, I would be happy to have a lease that discussed the possibility of a phase 2, but is not committed to a phase 2, so that it remains council's decision. And it's not an option like you think of options in normal real estate leasing, which is entirely at the purview of the tenant. So mentioning it, fine. Committing to it, not yet. I would want to see that. I'd also want to see other alternate parking areas developed, which maybe don't have such value as this spot does. So that's why I put forward this motion.
Elliot. I'm sorry.
Yes.
You okay?
I'm still collecting my thoughts if there was someone else in front of me.
Oh, no, there wasn't, but Councillor Spell.
So this idea that we have to activate the private industry and I recognize the fact that we do lease out public lands, not much. And actually, I'm not sure if I agree with leasing out public lands in general for private business. I prefer to see things like social housing on public lands and activating public lands with the public and things that aren't actually being charged for and that are equitable, that everybody can afford and that everybody can participate in. That's what I consider public lands useful for. And, you know, we really do celebrate the fact that we have this amazing municipal climbing park. That's pretty active, and our adventure center is active. It is packed in there. People park there and go in and have meetings and work and use internet, and there's moms and baby groups there every day. And the thought that we have to sort of have this fenced off seasonal scaffolding adventures thing in the middle of our public parking lot and draw more traffic to an area that is extremely dangerous with no active transportation way to get from downtown to this site. We have to actually encourage cars to come out from Vancouver to make this viable, because I can't see Squamish residents drive. Well, everybody's going to have to drive there, and that's embracing the automobile. So I'm not sure how we're not embracing the automobile by putting an attraction in this area. We're just reducing public use of this area because it's going to reduce traffic. And I will point out again that this is seasonal. This sits here for a good hunk of the year in bad weather, all fenced in and not active for the public. So it's reducing parking 100% of the year, but it's only used for seasonal activity. So how is this equitable to our public? And I appreciate that we brought this use of public land and leasing of public land forward to the public to decide, because it's not our land to decide, it's the public's land to decide on how it's used, how it's engaged with. And when we put it forward and say, hey, we're thinking about leasing out your land, which we didn't do, we said, we are leasing your land and here's a proposal on it. I think it's a bad public process. I think we should put out and say, we are thinking about leasing these lands, which ones, and have an entire public process on what lands are leasable and what lands are retaining for public use. To just say, here's the proposal that we're putting on it is not a public process. It's already a half-done public process. As well, I know I came in the week that it was put into lease and brought forward. I was away the 1 week and I missed the one meeting. But what I understood was there was a multitude of proposals that were on the site, and nowhere after that week was it brought forward where it was like, here are all the proposals for you to decide on. When I came into the picture, it was one company saying, here's the proposal for this land. This is the one we've decided on. So I really, unless, you know, I would have liked to look at other proposals, look at maybe food trucks for the area, or other, you know, amenities that the public can use that will actually activate the site between the adventure center. Not kids running across the road to go to the bathroom and people having to pay to get in and families having to pay to get in. It really, any other place in the district, if they want to find private land and put this up, I'm 100% in support of any other land. I even presented the campground as an area that was a possibility, because that's an area we actually have to put money in and can't use as a campground without having a large public investment. So leasing it out would make it equitable. Lots of parking in the area. It's on the same road. There's an exit there. It's actually a safe exit. So there's other means, and I appreciate the council, this is a hunk of land they put forward, but I just think that there's other areas that this project could go that don't impact the public as much as putting a proposal in this parking lot and taking up the space. And if there's a small one, if it does well, we can be sure that we're going to be back at council next year with phase 2, taking up the rest of the parking.
There were a few inaccuracies stated there. I just want council staff to clarify the process that we went through to come to the point that we are now. I don't know if Mr. Buxton wants to.
Yes, and I think my recollection is the same as Mr. Plum's. We're in September, and I can't recollect who was at council on those particular dates, but we got council's endorsement on the advertising of expression of interest, and some areas were included and some areas were excluded.
And this was a comprehensive, many lots around the district.
There were, so then we advertised. We then received a whole range of responses that we shared with council. This is one of them. We've proceeded with others, I understand.
Yeah, and through you, Mayor, on this property, the only other proposal that we received was from District 99, and it was for a indoor bike park. My memory's getting a little foggy. And but their footprint was significantly larger than, I believe, even the phase 2 for Kristall Turm. So council, looking at that point in time, elected not to proceed with the District 99. So these were the only 2 actual responses that we had through that process. Yeah, you bet.
Would anyone else like to speak to this at this point?
Thank you. I'm looking forward to council and staff debriefing this process, because I think we've learned a lot. And as the mayor said earlier, we went from being able to do this behind closed doors entirely to trying to open up the system. And I think we can improve on the process that's out there. But what was great is that our community did raise a lot of really important concerns and that are valid. And unfortunately, this proposal became a lightning rod for many things that have nothing to do with this particular proposal. And I appreciate staff trying to present, you know, options. You know, I'm sure it surprised a lot of people that there actually is a plan, and it's in our DCC bylaw, to expand the Smoke Bluffs Park parking lot, or that there's land designated for a commuter parking lot downtown. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as a council to be responsible for having a parking strategy, and that is currently in the budget for this year, and work's already been done by staff on that parking strategy, which I think we approved in April of this year. Because I think it's important that we have designated zones for people to enjoy our mountain biking trails, so that there's places for them to go and park, to be able to do those things, or to be dropped off by what is currently an idea about having some sort of shuttle, but I think that's got to be part of our future. I think we've got to have designated areas for people that want to access our waterfront. And as we build out the downtown and the oceanfront, we have to be thoughtful about that. People want to access trails, and so I think our parking strategy has to recognize all those different types of users. You know, I appreciate getting all the letters from people, and many of them reference the parking concerns at Murin and at the Chief, and those are provincial parks. And I'm sure we would be happy to work with our local community groups to advocate to senior levels of government to take responsibility for expanding their infrastructure. This is a much-loved corridor, for sure. But the province hasn't kept pace with the demand either. And certainly, I'm sure our council would welcome the opportunity to go to Victoria with some of our local groups and advocate for better facilities and expanding facilities at those parks to take some of the pressure off. The gondola clearly has a parking issue, and that's their problem, and council's been clear with them as well, that they need to sort out their parking issues. We have lots of opportunities to create hubs for commuters, for tourists. I'm so glad that Tourism Squamish weighed in, you know, with their letter. And not so much that I agree with everything that they've proposed, it's just that they point out that this is a place that we actually do want some churn. We want people coming and going, but we need places for them to go to access the recreation they want to access. To Councillor Race's point, you know, the Adventure Centre is a bit of an orphan, and what I like about the Kristall Turm proposal is that it gives people something to do for a few hours. They then have to go into the Adventure Centre and maybe check out businesses like Mr. Levine's who spoke. And maybe they do decide that they want to do another adventure while they're in town, or they get an idea for what they want to do next time. And that's what I love about having, you know, another purpose in the parking lot, is it creates opportunity for people to learn more about what they can do here. You know, I think, you know, I wish that this hadn't become a lightning rod for everybody's concerns. I think this is a great local company. I know my colleague referred to it as scaffolding, but I took a tour of the company after they proposed this idea last year because I was curious. And it's not scaffolding. There's a lot of craftsmanship that goes into this. There's a lot of pride, there's a lot of creativity, and I think that's what would be on display, is a really great representation of adventure, just in a different form. So I support the motion on the floor.
Councillor Chappelle, you've had a few opportunities. I want to make sure everyone from council has an opportunity to speak. I'll speak briefly and then I'll go back to you, because yeah, this one obviously is a challenging one. The community brought up a lot of issues, as Councillor Elliott and Councillor Reese and Councillor Chappelle and everybody said. And they're all valid. I mean, I don't mind that it was a lightning rod for other issues, because I think that's, not, everything's interconnected. I had thought that the smoke was, and it was in last year's 5-year financial plan, but I thought it was going to be in this year's 5-year financial plan. So I want to make sure we're revisiting that, because the Smoke Bluffs parking lot is under capacity and long overdue for overhaul. So I'd like to understand what bringing that ECC project back into 2017 as it was in last year. So we understand that. I think Mr. Levine talked about how poorly organized this parking lot is and how we can put, and I think Neil talked about how we can put pretty much a minimal amount of investment, $5,000, into making this a much, much more efficient parking lot. I have serious concerns about phase 2. Phase 2 is a whole other project, scope of project. And I'm not 100% sure. It really depends how it's referenced in the lease should this move forward. Because it is really a scope altogether different. The current footprint takes, was it 12 stalls for the actual footprint of the structure? And maybe I have a bit of a clarifying question. In the months where this isn't activated, so 6 months out of the year, whatever, when it's shut down, we just close off the physical structure, so about 12 parking stalls in the grand scheme of things, and then everything else would be open to parking.
For you,
Right.
my understanding is, and we haven't discussed that, but that the structure itself needs to be fenced, but the parking that would support it, that would be part of the Kristall Turm lease area, could be left available. And so that it would be more than, based on what I'm seeing here, it'd be more than 12 stalls that we lose. It'd probably be based on the structure, well, it could be, yeah, it would actually wouldn't be too far off.
Okay, so I just want to get a parameter. Can you also just, the expansion of the smoke bluffs, how many stalls are we gaining there? Just to try and understand.
Plus or minus 50.
And I agree, I don't believe we should be paving this. I mean, we can have more gravel parking lots. I don't believe. And a plus or minus an additional 50?
Yeah, on top of what's already there, new spaces.
So generally agree that it'd be nice to animate. This is, you know, you look at this overhead and the Adventure Center side is very professional, looking very landscaped. And the parking lot, which used to have an old garage not too long ago in that parking lot where they serviced logging trucks and that type of thing, is just a wide open, unscripted space. Something we haven't, that isn't in this overhead, is that we just put in a paved bike route to connect the corridor trail into downtown underneath the Mancomb-Blind Channel Bridge. And I agree, the Cleveland intersection is a problem, and we've been working with MOTI, and there's a whole bunch of improvements that are supposed to be coming to that intersection, but it's a challenging one for pedestrians. And we have put money and investment into improving that situation. So I'm happy to support phase 1. Phase 2 is a whole other challenge and problem, and I would have to see what the wording of the lease says, even considering that, because I don't want to give false hope there either, that phase 2 would be doable. But at this point, I'm not even sure we know if it is or not. But it is, you know, 4 times the amount of lease area about, and obviously a significant portion of parking. So I don't want to give false hope. Phase 2 is really challenging. I think phase 1 would complement the area, but we do need to think about this in context of all the parking issues, both at the smoke bluffs, both in the downtown with regard to the park and ride. And, you know, you put in the forestry center there, it's even more compromised. So those are my thoughts to this point. Councillor Kent.
Yeah, I appreciate all the comments that came in on this, because it did act as a bit of a lightning rod, and so Mr. Gomes there, my apologies, because you merely put up your hand and the expression of interest was put out there, and you became that sort of man that drew down the fire. I agree with the mayor. I think that phase 1 of this is doable. I would really like to see some cohesion in that parking lot, because it is just a scattershot. People park all over the place. There's a lot of wasted space. So I think the idea of putting some concrete in there and trying to align some of these spaces and make better use of that is really crucial. I like the idea of the commuter space maybe moving down towards where the power station is. And I think that this is a piece piece of property that's in flux. I mean, we're looking at what's going to happen here eventually, hopefully with the forestry center, and then also we're going to have a dike piece that's going to be coming into this thing. So who knows what's going to happen when that does occur, and what will happen then to the aerial roads piece. So I think that giving it the first phase is a start, and let's just see where that goes.
Yeah, I think that it's been good that we got all those comments. I think that was pretty much the driving force for having staff really look at some viable solutions as far as the parking issue, because I do agree that I don't think that having a gravel parking lot in this prominent area is not the highest and best use of the land. I'm okay to support it. You know, it is still just a lease. It's not a permanent structure, so there may be some better uses that come along later on when the lease is up for renewal, and we'll consider those as they come along. And I think that for me, my only concern about it at this point would be to make sure that the way the structure is designed really takes into context the site and doesn't detract from the surrounding natural environment and the views that people get. And so if there can be appropriate levels of design and screening and things of that nature to make sure that it doesn't intrude into that, then I think that will go a long way to making it an acceptable project.
Councilor Chappelle?
Thanks. I'm actually amazed that council, with the amount of public engagement from your own communities, the long-term parking lot strategy that we've had since 2000, and council hasn't acted on it. We need parking in the downtown as much as we need parking in this area. We need parking for businesses in downtown. We can't park commuters in downtown and support the local businesses who have also asked for parking. We have no land. We don't own land in the downtown that can actually be a parking lot and have a long-term strategy and actually address it in time to deal with a lease on this land. If we thought about this, we need parking strategies before we start using up parking and not afterwards. And, you know, I expect that with the amount of engagement on this project, and that our council doesn't listen to that engagement, except to say, oh, we'll deal with parking later, it shocks me. 35 stalls are being used up by the current thing, if I count correctly, on this project. And I'm not sure where 10 parking stalls or 10, you know, like that those numbers are being counted. But it's just the fact that this is a public piece of land, and that the highest and best use is for the public. It's not for the public. So I find it shocking that this project is going to go forward, and that council is going to talk nicely about a parking strategy again that's actually been on the bits. I just looked at the downtown neighborhood plan. We've had a parking strategy since 2000 and then 2008, and we've never acted on it. We have to budget for it, we have to tax for it. So instead of actually keeping parking that we had, we're going to tax the public to build more parking elsewhere. So I find that unacceptable, and I find that thinking about public use of land as highest and best use instead of public use is offensive to the public that is actually taking the time to write long diatribes, not form letters, but long diatribes about how they don't want this parking lot to be used except to be kept as an on and off area where people can park and go for bike rides and climb and use our land as we invite them to use it, as the outdoor capital, as an adventure center, and you know, that is a public building. It's not supposed to be a commercial building. It's supposed to be a public facility for getting together and gathering space and to be able to park and actually go elsewhere. Mr. Levine's business relies on parking long-term so that people can park their cars, rent a bike, and go riding. It's not that he needs three-hour parking. He needs all-day parking and relies on that parking lot for his business to run. So I do find it upsetting when we ask for public engagement, we ask for the public to voice their opinion about things, and they do, and we ignore it. And this is a decision, you know, there's a lot of times we've asked the public to engage on things like, you know, that we haven't asked for the public to engage on things, and they get angry and they write us, but it's not actually our decision to make. But right now, this is our decision to make, and we're we're gonna give it away to a private enterprise to use our public land. And once you put private enterprise on some public land, you can never get it off because the outrage of removing the employment, removing it for other uses is gonna be huge. So this is a one-time decision that, you know, this summer is going to actually make this a really unpleasant area to be with 80, you know, possibly 80 cars an hour turning in and trying to get out in the same exit that we have no plans for. So it's, yeah, I find it untenable. And clearly I don't support it.
Yeah, I beg to differ. I think council and staff reflected very thoughtfully on the comments that we had. And I think there was actually a really good dialogue and a lot of good sort of investigative work that came out of it. Council doesn't make decisions on the number of people who respond. Council doesn't make decisions on a form letter. Council doesn't make decisions on a staff report. Council makes decisions comprehensively and takes into account all the inputs of both the members of council, the members of staff, and the public. I think the public's feedback on this was fantastic, and I think it's opened up doors to allow us to be really more clear about some of the direction we need to take with regard to Smoke Bluffs Park, with regard to Park and Ride, and with regard to comprehensively animating and enhancing this whole area. The details of the lease will come back to council. I don't know what those details are per se now. Is it a 5-year lease, a 10-year lease? What those are. So the revenue generated from that lease, you know, maybe that goes into specifically into other parking solutions. Council can determine those things. We actually, Director of Real Estate Management can attest, we have many properties that we lease out. Montessori School, the wood waste lot in the northern part of town, the sidewalk in front of Zephyr. We use public lands to generate revenue for the city, to generate economic development, and of course, yes, most of our land is for the use of the public, and that's first and foremost in terms of specific pieces of land. But we have to create other revenue sources. So, you know, I see from my point of view, I don't know what this will generate in a year, but let's say theoretically it generates $15,000, $10,000, doesn't matter what it is. We take those and we put those monies into improving things that we need. We are not a municipality that has oodles of money in the bank account. We're a very spread out community and we have a challenge delivering our services. So we do have to think creatively about how we animate our spaces and about how we create revenue. This isn't a big revenue generator, but it's part of a bigger piece in a puzzle. We lease out the, we have a long list of properties we lease and buildings we lease. So it is part of our business plan to be doing this sort of thing. It's not out of the ordinary. I think in this specific circumstance, it is a valid, debatable point whether this piece of property should be used for this purpose or other purposes. Absolutely, but to do a blanket statement that all municipal land should not be considered for something other than public use, I think is actually going against most of our policies. Anyway, I think council has deliberated on this a lot. I would like to see in our budget discussion next Monday the Smoke Bluffs parking lot expansion so we can understand that and make a decision on that direction. But with that said, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Chappelle opposes. Motion carries. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. We are back in our regular business meeting for January 17th, and we are on item 9A1, action requested correspondence. But it was a scheduled page. This was a letter from a variety of business owners in the Pemberton Street area, and there is a recommended motion that it be forwarded to staff for consideration and response. I think they bring up some really good issues, and it would be good to put our minds to that. So, you happy to move that, Councillor Kent? Councillor Black-and-Wolf, are you seconding that? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Now thank you for taking the time to send that. We have correspondence for information. Is there anything council would like to pull from this list for discussion? I think I wanted to pull Mayor Corrigan's. Let me just remind myself what that one was about.
If you do,
Yeah, what's that?
well, you're probably
Oh, yes, that was,
tax requisition.
yeah, so I'll pull that one. Is there anything else anyone would like to pull at this point? Okay, so this is a letter from Mayor Corrigan talking about excessive BC assessment increases in Burnaby, and I believe the Mayor of Vancouver and the council in Vancouver have also expressed the same. As you know, in Squamish, it was outlined that we actually had the greatest number of properties with the greatest increase in assessments. And I know there's a lot of people out there really concerned about this issue. I got mine and it's over 60%. Other properties are at 70%. The average is probably quite high, so we don't understand what the tax implication is, but as outlined in this letter, there's a lot of concern about the unknown and about the potential impact on a number of properties. So they've forward a motion to Premier Christy Clark asking that property values be set at last year's assessments. Is that, did I read that right?
Frozen.
Yeah. And I don't even know if that's exactly where I want to go, but I would like to understand what, I mean, from our point of view, we get the same revenue regardless of what individual assessments are anyway. So, and maybe, I don't expect finance to answer this now, but maybe it's something we want to refer finance to just to think about in terms of whether it's something we want to explore with the province or not as well.
So my only comment on that is that as you know, we've articulated before, and you've articulated so well on many occasions, the assessment is not the only factor in tax rates. We look at, you know, if everyone goes up 40% and we don't need any you know, increase in tax revenue, it probably doesn't matter if the assessment went up. So really the only reason we'd really want to look at this is if we think there are a number of, you know, one-off properties that went up that we don't think would be able to carry that next year, or that there's going to be, those particular ones are going to go back down next year. Otherwise, I guess I'd argue that if everyone's assessments are going up, is it worth freezing it and sort of making the BC assessment process modified? And it's almost like the capital markets, right? Do you really interfere and play with them, or do you let them play out?
Yeah, thanks. And with respect to the mayor, Mayor Corrigan, I mean, frankly, it didn't make any sense to me, because the going up and down is not the thing so much that affects your taxes. It's your relationship to the other properties in the entire pool. And as Matthew says, if the whole thing goes up more or less the same amount, then it doesn't make any difference. And where you do get the odd property that spikes, I mean, there is an appeal process. It's not absolute, and that even in turn can be appealed in extreme cases. So it didn't really make any sense to me to stay at 2015. I mean, there could have been just as many inaccuracies in 2015 as 2016, or things that seem to be unfair. I'm not really inclined to spend a lot of time on that. I'm not aware of a significant problem in Squamish. Everybody's assessments went up, but if it's the ones that go up in isolation that have the issue, and they have the appeal process if they think somehow they're being treated unfairly.
Yeah, I guess some of the challenge, and I'm not advocating either way, I just thought it was worth a discussion, is that people don't know, like people are going 70% increase in my assessment, but they don't know what we don't know what the average is or what that actual effect is going to be. And for some properties, it'll be a lot of money for them, and other properties might go down if they only went up a certain amount. So I know last year, for example, Valleycliff, you know, a neighborhood where the average family home is less than other neighborhoods, for example, the Highlands, it went up percentage-wise quite a bit more. So, and I don't think, I agree with Christine, I don't think the solution is to just freeze it at other rates, but there seems to be a flaw in how BC assessment goes about this, and I don't feel like our values from the marketplace went up 70% here or 40% here, but somehow BC assessment lagged quite a bit last year or the year before, and I know just looking at mine, it was like -17 one year, 0, 0, plus 30, plus 69 or whatever it is this year. So there seems to be there's certainly no science to this from BC assessment's point of view, and I don't know if there's a better system out there, and maybe that's where we should be looking to the province to fine tune this process, because it seems, especially for communities like ours, really it just fluctuates so much. And I don't know, maybe I'm just babbling right now.
I know it's a long night, but I will just say that BC assessment.
That's yes.
And then that was not, no, that wasn't directed your way. It was just, I don't want to get too technical because I know everyone's tired. But BC assessment uses industry standard appraisal approaches. And unfortunately, if a house sells next to yours that year and nothing sold in your neighborhood for 5 years, they go based on market values in that neighborhood. And they're very consistent, they're very professional. I can't think of anyone that could get this science any better than they do, frankly.
It's imperfect in its perfection. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Councillor Beckham.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, and hopefully our front end staff, our front of the line staff are fully aware and explaining to residents that there are a lot of provincial programs to help homeowners. So one of the ones that I discovered recently in helping people out in my other job is that there is a low-income homeowners grant for low income, and that's in addition to the basic homeowners grant. So, you know, maybe there's people who are not aware of that because they never really thought about having to, you know, deal with a fairly significant increase, but there are some tools there that people can avail themselves of to deal with that increase. Because, I mean, I guess in theory, I mean, if you see a very big increase in 1 year, that probably means that, you know, maybe the previous years you actually had a low assessment compared to what maybe it would have been just because there was no sales in your area, right? So it kind of all evens out in the end, but I do recognize the shock when you get that scary number. But you know, I know that we'll be doing our best as a council to keep our requisition very consistent and fairly reasonable, so that you know, people aren't. But at the end of the day, I mean, it is still a fairly equitable system in the sense that, you know, the more expensive home that you have and afford, the more you pay for taxes.
That's an interesting point, and that people might not be aware of some of the things. Personally, I was not aware of that particular one, but I know there are others, and it might be helpful for staff at the front to have a little handout that they can give people. It'll just kind of itemize these things. The seniors discount, you don't qualify for the rural, I don't think, but the deferral provisions, etc. So, and the low income one, which I don't know anything about, frankly.
So we can do a little mini handout at.
Yes, and our staff is extremely
They're
good
really
at this
good.
already. Honestly, they do a lot of coaching and help people where they can. They make
And we
suggestions.
have all those suggestions online too?
We do have, when we sent out even at this latest utilities thing, we outlined again some of those
But we have it
deferment
online?
programs. Yeah. And on our, they are online.
And did it have though the low income homeowner?
You know what,
grant
I'm gonna
one?
go explore
'Cause I
that one
think that
more
was a
and
bit
make sure I
obscure for
understand.
some
Yeah, you
reason.
might be right, so
Yeah.
I have a mental note to take it away and have a better look at that myself. So.
Item 6, I believe it's opposite. The first two are against, not in support of the Waterloo Club, and the last two are in support. Just for, I do want to acknowledge all the people corresponding with regard to the budget item, the van. And so just to take all that into consideration, there's a bunch more added today as we deliberate in the budget, make council aware of that. And we've been getting correspondence from the industry and Carburetor, yeah, with regard to our sewer use bylaw. And I know staff are already sort of have their minds tuned to the dishwasher aspect of it. So maybe we'll just refer these to staff, just so we're referring them to staff.
Can I just speak to that? Briefly?
Absolutely.
Briefly. For me, I was a little confused when I read, there are several letters here from several different entities regarding food grinders, and they said that they were disappointed at our failure to consult on our bylaw, which was banning food grinders, in-sink food grinders. I won't use the actual brand name. But to my knowledge, I don't think a municipality is under any obligation to consult with a private corporation on the construction of its bylaws. In fact, it's our wastewater treatment plant, it's our infrastructure, and our community. And I agree with altering the language about the dishwashers that can incorporate those grinders. I think that's sort of minutiae in the whole concept, but it's just a bit surprising that they feel that we somehow overlooked a consultation with them when we're under no obligation to consult with them. And we've heard from our technicians and our engineers that it's not great for our system. I think that's sufficient for me to hear.
Yeah, and certainly the amount of food that might be remnant on a plate going in a dishwasher is very different from ramming food down an in-sink grinder. And this is we get lobbied by industry on a variety of decisions we make. Water bottles in our plastic bags, you know, it's part of the system, it's part of how, you know, it works, and appreciate them writing us. So I'll just move that we 7, 8, 9, and 10 just be referred to staff. Moved by Councillor Race, I'll second that. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I believe that's it. I just want to make sure the BC timber sales will be put on our website for public information. Maybe I'll move that we refer that one to staff and ensure that we put it on the website so public is aware of this BC timber sale update. And seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And a motion to receive all the remaining letters. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And approval of the minutes for the regular business meeting of December 20th, the special business meeting of December 20th, the committee of the whole meeting of December 20th, the special business meeting of January 10th, committee of the whole meeting of January 10th. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Chappell. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, committee minutes and reports. We have Smoke Bluffs Parks committees that we have 99. There's a recommended motion that 99 Trials Association nominate Spencer Fitchin as a representative of the Smoke Bluffs Park Committee for a 2-year term ending December 31st, 2018. We do these one at a time. Could we do them all? Ms. Arthurs, can we do them one at a time, or?
There were separate correspondence received.
But okay, why don't we just do that one? I'll move that. Is there a second? Second by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Squamish Trail Society nominates Sean Gosnell as alternate representative for Smoke Bluffs Park Committee. Moved by Councillor Ray, second by Councillor Chappell for a 2-year term ending December 31st. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I don't believe there are staff in camera or council in camera announcements. There was no unscheduled attendance. Open question period for clarification of agenda items. And councillor staff announcements. Anybody? Just want to say we are in Eagle Festival season. The annual count was last weekend. It was up from last year by a couple hundred. I think it was like 700, just under 700. Before it was only 400 something, so a little bit up. Beautiful day. I took my cousin and a friend of ours from UBC out, and it's always good to go experience our splendor with people who it still is like, wow, like there's eagles everywhere, and for us, it feels like, you know, we see it every day as part of our day-to-day conversation, but for them, it was just great to do that. Had the chamber lunch last week, spoke at that. Councilor Chappelle attended, as well as a number of staff. Good turnout, good conversation, and I'd like to push it further out in January next year, because doing that, we're going to get back from Christmas holidays was a bit strenuous, but. And I think that's about it. Lots of events coming up for the Eagle Festival. Robbie Burns Day is coming up soon. I'm sure there's lots of other stuff, but I will not go on any longer. Anybody else? Motion to terminate. Nobody? Moved by Councilor Race, seconded by Councilor Kent. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much.